Well, good morning, everyone. I'd like to call to order the May 29th, 2024 Clackamas County Budget Committee meeting. Thank you for all being here. Today we'll hear from various departments, their presentations. We will then recess for dinner. There will be an opportunity for public testimony this evening at 6 p.m. You also may provide written testimony by email to bcc@clackamas.us, which will be included in the record and provided to the members of the committee. All oral public testimony will be heard this evening at 6 p.m. Tomorrow, on May 30th, the Clackamas County Budget Committee will convene at 8:30 for deliberations and voting on the proposed 24-25 proposed budget. Financial staff will give us an update, an overview, and department directors will go over significant changes and answer questions. Elizabeth Comfort, our finance director, you may begin.
And actually, that's a slight error in the script. Our apologies. Oops. We're going to go right to elected officials first.
Oh, okay.
And then Elizabeth and Sandra present after that.
Okay, I got you. And are we in, Gary, the same order?
Yes.
So County Treasurer Brian Navarra. Thank you. I'm new at this, so forgive me.
You're doing a great job.
Okay, I'm trying to make this.
Tony, you got my slides right? Thank you, sir. Can you guys hear me okay? Am I on?
Yes.
Give me a second here to set up. All right, nice to see everybody this morning. Morning. For the record, my name is Brian Nava, Clackamas County Treasurer. Good morning, Budget Committee members, the Board of County Commissioners, County Administration, and staff. I am the Clackamas County Treasurer. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today and to speak to the great people of Clackamas County. I'd like to first acknowledge my colleagues. Without the work of them and the wonderful colleagues we have in our office, our mission and the Clackamas County's mission cannot be achieved. I'd also like to thank the budget staff for all their help. Jan and Priscilla were our primary contacts, but info from Sandra and the entire budget staff has been greatly appreciated as well. Sandra, I'm going to make it out to Turner soon for that cup of coffee we keep talking about. And also, I would be remiss, I saw yesterday a couple pictures on the Facebook. Commissioner West and the rest of the people that served, really appreciate your service as well. I know there's a couple in the audience too, so really appreciate that. I'd be remiss to not say that. As always, I'm extremely excited to talk about the Treasurer's Office in whatever capacity, as I know a significant portion of this Budget Committee has experience in local government work and or in accounting. You know it's not very often that accountants are asked to talk about accounting. I'm glad Gary has allotted me a couple hours this morning to go over the inner workings of the Treasurer's Office.
That's a joke, right, Brian?
So the mission of the Treasurer's Office is to provide treasury, investment, and audit services to the public of Clackamas County so they can trust that their funds are safeguarded, and to the taxing districts, departments, and offices of Clackamas County so they can efficiently and effectively provide services to their customers. As Gary outlined in his budget message, the county and its 8 service districts have a budget of over $2.9 billion with a B, Gary, dollars. Generally speaking, all funds collected by the county and its service districts are held safely and securely by the Treasurer's Office until they are ready for distribution. Our budget and goals align with and support all of the county's strategic priorities, but especially the county's goal of building public trust through good government. Page 2, Tony. We have a budget for fiscal year 25, wait for him to get there, $1,582,000 and 151. This represents just a $58,195 increase from fiscal year 24 and only an $8,901 increase in general fund support. The Treasurer's Office continues to be small but mighty. Now, as it relates to pages 3 and 4, they show the breakdown of our budget by revenues and expenditures. I'll discuss some of the highlights on page 5. I am happy to go over any additional questions you may have with the breakdown on these pages at the end of the presentation. But essentially, we have a pretty flat budget, so let's move directly to page 5, Tony. There were many major accomplishments and some significant changes for our small but mighty office. In the interest of time, I'm just going to highlight a few. General fund support remains the same, and funding sources are expected to decrease. You may recall last year when I indicated that we expect one-time funding sources the county receives to continue to decrease and make it more difficult for my office and other departments and offices to continue operations without additional support. I also indicated that my office would likely be fine for fiscal year 24 and fiscal year 25, but I think it's going to get tough for fiscal year 26, maybe hold off until fiscal year 27. I know my office's budget is one of the smallest in the counties, but I still anticipate it may get tough in the future. I've very much appreciated the conversations County Administrator Schmidt and Budget Officer Gary Schmidt and I have had over the past year regarding these circumstances, as well as his recognition of the similar issues in the budget message he prepared and presented yesterday. I look forward to working with the Budget Committee and Board of County Commissions on solutions in the future. Increase in allocated costs. A lot of the allocated costs are driven by FTE, and we run really thin with 7 personnel. I completely understand that costs are rising. This is not at all a criticism of the allocated costs. I just wanted to make sure the Budget Committee was aware that when we look at our office's cost increase from fiscal year 24 to fiscal year 25, this is one of the bigger increases in costs in this budget year for my office. Honestly, with only having 7 people in our office, it's exhausting to think about all the work the office completes. I'm truly blessed to have such great colleagues, and if any of my former colleagues are listening, I'm also referring to them as well. So fully staffed. So along those lines, we were down 20% staff in our office for a long time. Myself and my colleagues showed tremendous dedication in the Treasurer's Office, other county departments and offices, but most of all the public of Clackamas County by foregoing vacations, working long days and late nights, and much more. First, this has nothing to do with HR's recruitment process. James Callahan did a spectacular job as our recruiting guru. This was mainly attributed to the fact that everyone in our office is so fantastic at their job that when an opening became available, the next person below that opening was the best person for that job, which meant like a waterfall trickling down a mountain, it created another opening for another person, and so on and so forth. Promoting from within is a good problem to have when you have such great people working with you, but also means it takes a little more time to fill the cascading openings. I'm happy to report that we are now fully staffed and running on all 4 cylinders. That's a pun for you, Commissioner Savas. For pages 8 through 11, I want to take just a minute, you don't have to switch them, Tony, to just point out a couple things that you'll be able to see if you flip through it. Tax distribution, in addition to the over $2 billion county and service district budgets, there is also over $1 billion in property taxes collected. The assessors and treasurer's office partner to collect and distribute these funds. These taxes continue to be distributed timely, accurately, and completely to the over 120 taxing districts by the Clackamas County Treasurer's Office. Without timely distribution of these taxes, your police, fire, cities, school districts, libraries, Clackamas County, and more could not continue operations. There is also a short video online that describes the Treasurer's Office that we encourage everyone to watch. It's not on a Netflix documentary yet, but PGA did a great job in its production. I'm available for autographs afterwards. I haven't signed any yet on it either. Fraudulent checks. The GFOA, this is important, the GFOA noted in April of 2024 that from 2021 to 2024, the number of fraudulent checks has doubled. I don't have time in this presentation, but if you're like my kids and don't know what a check is, please feel free to drop by my office and we can discuss it later. But I'll be happy to report we continue to catch, reject, and forward all these fraudulent checks to local authorities. They've actually been able to catch a few criminals that are trying to catch our fraudulent checks, which has been super exciting. And again, thank our law enforcement, Oregon City PD, and the CCSO for partnering with us on that endeavor. Cash handling, we are getting more and more requests for our cash handling training. We hope to expand this free training soon to our local governments, municipalities, and nonprofits throughout Clackamas County as well. Internal audit is doing some absolutely fantastic work. We've responded to 7 advisory requests. We also had 13 reports to the Good Government Hotline in calendar year 23 and are at 7 reports to the hotline in calendar year 24. These reports to the hotline have resulted in 3 management letters facilitating real-time process improvements, and our assurance services in fiscal year 24 have currently yielded 3 reports. In general, the Treasurer's Office is meeting or exceeding our goals. We have highlighted many in the presentation and in your packet, and hope to present this information in more detail to the board in the future. It's important to keep in mind most of our functions are required by state statute, federal requirements, and/or county code, and we have little room for noncompliance. For example, we do not want the public's money to be adequately and legally collateralized only 75% of the time, or for our taxing districts to receive their timely, accurate, and complete tax distribution from my office only 90% of the time, We pride ourselves on continually achieving statutory compliance 100% of the time. I am truly blessed to work with such a dedicated and smart group of people. I truly love this county. I love the people in the county and working for the county, and I love coming into work every day and continuing to do this work for the public with my colleagues. It's truly an honor. I welcome any and all questions you may have, and if I don't have the answer today, I'll make sure to get it to you shortly. Thank you, Budget Committee members, and especially the Public Committee members who are taking the time to be here today and throughout the year. Bless you.
Thank you, Brian. So questions, and for Budget Committee members, if you remember, put your tag up if you have a question, and we'll identify you and call on you in order. And so questions for Brian, and it looks like Jan has one.
Yes, Brian. I know that you're very diminished in what you can invest in as public government, but I was curious as to what kind of returns the county has seen in the last year.
Perfect. No, appreciate the question, Jen. Nice to see you in person as well. So, great question. So from July 1st, 23 to April 30th, 24, I think you and I didn't plan this, but it worked out perfect. We got 4.14% in our return.
Thank you. Brian, I do have a question. You had mentioned in your presentation, you talked about increasing cost, as you know, many know about because things have gotten more expensive, but you also mentioned in a few years that you're going to be seeing some real challenges. What would be some of the highlights of those challenges that you're thinking about?
I think the big thing, especially as it relates to our office, is just fund balance in general. Gary did a great job of hitting it yesterday in terms of all the different one-time funding sources that the county has got. And so from that level, our investment return, the example, I think Commissioner West and I talked about this before, was, 1% return on $100, 1% return on $1 billion is a lot different. So, and Jan, I love the question too, because ORS 294 actually really restricts what we can invest in. So we don't have an opportunity to get a high return. We have no Bitcoin right now, just so you guys know. But logistically, so that's why I say it gets tough. And that's why when Gary and I have talked so much over the last year, and sorry, Gary, chime in if I misinterpret anything. It's one of those things where those challenges in the future of the one-time funding decrease, just budgets getting tighter, that's going to limit the return we can get. And then, of course, who was at the OCBA presentation from the Office of Economic Development? Anyways, I believe his name's Director McMullen, did a great job of kind of presenting. I mean, we have challenges in the future, and depending on which source you listen to in terms of the economy, I mean, that will impact Clackamas County, whether we can have that soft landing or we end up in something different. That's just going to be a challenge. That'll be for all municipalities as well. So I don't know if I'm answering your question in terms of specifics, but I think it's that general, just you can kind of see that it's probably coming a little bit where it's just going to be tougher, that's all.
Yeah, good. Thank you. That answered my question. I appreciate it. Any other questions for Brian? Yes, Paul.
Yeah. Thank you, Treasurer Nava, for your presentation. It's a question I will ask you, probably maybe only you, because you're first, and that is that, do you feel in general that as we navigate budget to budget in these tight times, do you feel confident that your minimum needs will be met?
Yes, I do. And I'm going to attribute that to County Administrator Schmidt, because he's done a good job when we've been in those one-on-one conversations of saying, paraphrasing, we'll make sure we make you whole. I mean, so in terms of my personal budget, I know that commitment's been there, so it's been easier to go through, kind of navigate, what are potentially uncertain waters. And again, I say that in the sense of uncertain waters for USA in general. I mean, when we're talking Chairman Powell and all the other things that are happening, I mean, we're just, if you look at the 2-year, 10-year inverted curve and things like that, you start to see that there's a data that would support that it could be tough in the future. So, sorry, I went a little further. So, yes, to answer your question.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, Brian, thank you very much.
Perfect. Thank you.
Now we'd like to call up from Assessment and Taxation, Bronson Ruda.
All right, good morning, folks. I need to let you know that last week I lost a rock, paper, scissors contest to Brian Nava. so I allocated all my jokes, and kudos to him. He was able to double up or possibly triple it. So mine's going to be a little bit less humorous. So good morning, Budget Committee members. My name is Bronson Rueda, and I'm the County Assessor. I want to thank you all, Finance team and Administrator Schmidt, for tackling the budget task this year and for shepherding my department through the process. I'm going to go over the first 5 pages of my budget slides, but please feel free to ask questions anytime. No need to wait until the end. So let's dig in. I would like to start on tab 6, page 3. Is that the correct numbering? Starting with the revenue line items, I have 4 of them. The bulk, about 85%, comes from the general fund. And we learned yesterday from Cindy Becker's presentation, this makes my department a Fund 100 department. The other revenue sources I receive are from CAFA, enterprise zone fees, and miscellaneous fees. Moving to the expense section, about 72% make up personnel expenses, and the rest is materials and services, which include postage, continuing education, memberships and publications for appraisers, telephone and internet costs, software maintenance, and cost allocations. In summary, my fiscal year proposed budget is $10,794,927, which is about 6% more than the amended budget this year. Now I'd like to move to tab 6, page 5, the significant changes from fiscal year 23-24 budget. I don't have any significant changes in my proposed budget to bring to your attention, but there are a few budget items in fiscal year 25 potentially coming down the chute for A&T. First is the core system replacement. I talked with you last year about this. Our core software was purchased in 1999, 25 years ago. Technology has advanced over that time period, and Oregon property tax laws have changed as well. There are software systems that have better workflows that could create efficiencies in our processes and better able to keep up with legislative changes. Clackamas County is leading a joint RFP process with Lane, Yamhill, and Wasco counties who have the same core software as us. We hope to leverage cost savings and implementation while creating an attractive opportunity for vendors to secure 4 customers with one procurement process. The RFP went out last week, and we won't know potential costs until later this summer. When a vendor is chosen, we will need funding to pay for the new software. I don't have the funding in the proposed budget since costs are unknown at this time. Next, I want to talk about the additional FTE requests listed. We currently have 61 FTE, which is 11 FTE short of the Oregon Department of Revenue's recommended staffing guidelines for Clackamas County. I certainly don't think we need 11 more FTE, but there is a need to keep up with increasing workloads and unfunded legislative mandates. In addition, we need to ensure we're abiding by statute, including valuing all property at 100% of real market value and administering Oregon's property tax system in Clackamas County fairly and equitably. I have already submitted paperwork to Finance for 1 additional FTE and to repurpose a current position. After discussion with the accounting administrator, I agree that addressing our need is better suited for later this year or early 2025. Next, I want to talk about A&T funding, which is exciting. In 1989, Oregon legislation created the CAFA program to reverse a disintegration taking place in the property tax system to recognize a shared responsibility statewide for uniformity and accuracy in property tax assessment. Over the years, program costs have increased, but the CAFA dollars contributed to each county remained relatively flat. Each legislative session, there's talk about property tax reform and funding. Some sessions, the topic gains more traction than others, but there has not been a bill introduced or sponsored since 1989 that I know of to address A&T funding. However, there is activity right now leading up to the 2025 legislative session. It is my understanding Representative Smith, through the direction of House Revenue Chair Representative Nathanson, has created a work group with the intent of introducing a bill to address A&T funding. The bill is to provide a solution that does not include the use of more general fund. If addressed in the 2025 legislative session, this could provide a boost to A&T funding across the state. Lastly, I want to talk about vacancy savings. I put this item in because at the time we had four vacancies, which is 6.6%, compared to a high of 10 vacancies earlier this fiscal year, 16.6%. This indicated a downward trend in vacancy savings for next fiscal year compared to this fiscal year. However, as of last week, we are back up to 8 vacancies. The vacancies put a strain on our statutory mandated functions we provide to the public and to our taxing districts. Additional strain will occur if we are still experiencing high vacancy when we begin implementing our new core system. Thank you for your time. Are there any questions?
Thank you, Brunson. Yes, Commissioner West.
Good morning.
Morning.
Couple questions. Just a little bit curious about the core system replacement that you talked about. How is the new software going to be beneficial to the county? What does it bring that we don't already have? And then why do you believe it's necessary to have this upgrade? And I'm just kind of curious to know a little bit more about that.
So what will it bring is right now our software is dated. And so we have to do some of our tasks outside of the system. And whenever we do tasks outside of the system, that creates a huge possibility for error. And there's some things we have to repeat multiple times outside the system. And every time you do that, that creates error. And errors in the property tax system aren't good because that could cause more work on the back end. One of those ways is through appeals. So if we have errors and we get appealed, that creates more work for our staff and the clerk's office to address those appeals. So that's one way that it can benefit us.
Quick question. Do we have any security issues with the current software? And do we get better security and protecting of information and data? Is there any issue like that?
No, this time, no, we haven't had any issue.
Okay.
Yeah.
Currently, would you think the A&T funding is basically an unfunded mandate from the legislature that we're trying to get fixed? And I know that this isn't about our legislative policies moving forward, but without it being fixed, is that kind of what we're facing?
I don't think the entire A&T departments in all the counties are unfunded because we're funded. We're
But
funded.
not fully funded the way they should be?
Not fully funded, and the way they should be is an opinion. I would agree with you. I don't think they're fully funded the way they should be. And yes, I heard once from another assessor, over the years, legislation gives small unfunded mandates to us, not enough to add additional FTE in any one session, but over time, it takes a toll. And he described it as a death by 1,000 cuts, which is kind of what we're up against right now. Over the last 30 years, there's additions and changes to the legislative, to our property tax system, which our system can't currently handle. And so we repeatedly have to do more and more outside of our system, which creates risk.
Okay. That answers my questions. I appreciate your time this morning. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Commissioner Scholl.
Thank you, Assessor Rueda. On tab 6, page 3, general fund support, increase $512,295. Is that driven solely by increases in payroll?
Let me find where we're at. We're on
Okay.
tab 6, page 3.
Tab 6, page 3, go to the left, operating revenue, and come over all the way to your change from last year to this year. You got a positive $512,295. Is that due solely to the increase in payroll for your department?
Not solely. It is, there's two things that went up significantly. One is payroll, and one, as the treasurer noted, was allocated costs. Our allocated costs went up 14% this year.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Thank you. And Wendy, you're next.
Good morning.
Morning.
I was just wondering if you could characterize for me the level of tax appeals that you are confronted with?
I wrote down some stats in here, so let me. So if you look on tab 6, page 16, the middle key performance measure, number of Board of Property Tax Appeals. So in 21 and fiscal year 22 and 23, relatively similar, 196, 184. And then this year increased to 300. So that's partly due to the pandemic. People continue to think, and rightly so, people continue to think that the value of the property is going down when the information and market information we have supports otherwise, so there's more appeals. This year, it was unique in that we had an increase in 94% of our commercial appeals. And that was tough to handle. So it is a concern on our part of that increased workload.
What kind of dollars are we talking about in terms
I don't
of?
have that information in front of me, but I can get it for you if you're interested. What specifically are you
Well, I'm
interested in?
just- Well,
Excuse
is
me,
it-
Wendy, could you speak into
Sure.
the microphone? Everybody, it's kind of hard to hear.
trying to see if it's
Thank you.
if it's significant or not. I
Like,
mean,
do you want a total out of the 300 appeals? Do you want a total of the RMV?
yeah. I mean, what would
That was
be
being
the
appealed?
revenue lost if all of those appeals were won? I mean, is it a large number?
It would be a large number, but we don't lose. I don't consider it a win or a loss. I consider
course.
an appeal a taxpayer's opportunity to question our value, which is good, because in our line of work, we do what's called mass appraisal. And so we trend properties. We don't have the personnel, no county has the personnel to go out and individually appraise properties. And so we do what's called mass appraisal, and that creates a trend. So some values are going to be a bell curve. Some values are going to be right on the money. Some values are going to be a little less. Some values are going to be a little more. That's the nature of mass appraisal. It's not unique to our county. It's not unique to the state. And so if you think your value is more than what it should be, then I highly encourage, and I tell taxpayers this every chance I get, I highly encourage you to appeal your value, because it's our job to make sure values are fair and equitable in our county. And so if they think it's overvalued, then yes, please appeal it. And we'll take a look at it. We'll see what market information you have, and if we agree with it, then we'll stipulate to the, a value that is fair.
Yeah.
If we don't agree, then it'll go to the Board of Property Tax Appeals, and depending on that outcome, they have further avenues to appeal to the magistrate tax court down in Salem.
I appreciate that. Given property values today, I'm just trying to figure out, or at least have a sense of, what the loss of revenue could mean.
I'll get some numbers for you.
From a budgetary perspective.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Savas.
Yeah, thank you for your presentation, Assessor Ruda. Years back, you mentioned in your presentation that, start over. You mentioned in your presentation that the requirement to assess properties and to keep up with that state requirement. So I have I guess really a two-part question at least, and that is, number one, that software that we bought years ago, or that service that we bought years ago, which either was it aerial or satellite, which was improved, could demonstrate changes. And so if there was a striking improvement made, your staff's ability to monitor that and assess that. I'm sure that may not be the only means of meeting that requirement, but how's that worked out for you, that service?
It's worked out great, Commissioner Savas. Thank you for asking. And that's one of the reasons when I talked before about how the Oregon Department of Revenue, by the way, if you don't know, the Oregon Department of Revenue oversees all 36 counties. It's their job to make sure that we're doing everything fairly and equity and according to law. So when they say that we're 11 FTE undervalued, understaffed. It's things like pictometry, which is the aerial imagery that you're talking about, Eagle View. It's software like that that gives us the ability to do more with less staff. So that's why when I say I don't think we need 11 more FTE, it's because of pictometry, things like pictometry that enable us to do more with that technology.
Okay. So on that note, just roughly, I mean, I don't want to put you on the spot, but how many properties in Clackamas County are where the market value is the same as the assessed value? Probably very few, right?
Very few.
Very few.
Very few. And for residences, very small.
Okay, so I'm trying to understand contextually what the state statute requirement is that we're talking about in light of the 3% property tax limitation, right? So is it time sensitive, or is it within a certain period of time or years? Because it seems to me that if there is a property that is the market value, we're not keeping up, but the assessed value is substantially down, it doesn't really make a monetary difference, right? So I'm just trying to understand contextually what the state statute means essentially.
So this can get complicated real quick.
Oh, no, you don't have to.
So there's three values in Oregon. There's raw market value, which is essentially what you would pay for your house on an open market given a fair transaction. There's MAV, M-A-V, maximum assessed value, and then there's assessed value. Typically for residences, the MAV is equal to the assessed value, the AV, and the AV is what the tax rate is applied to determine taxes. So the statutes say we have to value property at 100% of real market value. So real market value up here and assessed value typically down here. So we have to value at 100% of real market value. So if we determine properties are higher, or when we go out and look at our market data and we lower or higher values, a lot of times for residences, that's not going to affect their AV. And so when you're talking about the increase every year for residences, commercial properties, it's a little bit different. That does go up 3% every year, typically. In the 2008-9 period when we had the downturn in the economy, it was interesting because market value was way up here, assessed value was down here. We're creeping up on the time frame, Gary? And even though market value dipped drastically in that downturn in the economy, a lot of properties didn't get down to that assessed value. And so there was a real, discontention with customers, with property owners, because they saw their value going down, but their taxes continuing to increase. So that was a real hurdle for county and statewide assessment taxation offices to communicate that message. And our property tax system is, in my opinion, one of the most difficult in the nation. And so it was a time period where it was hard on the assessment taxation offices to deliver that message.
Thank you.
Mr. Saranac.
My question is, you mentioned this.
Get the microphone closer.
Sorry, you mentioned a significant increase in commercial appeals,
Correct.
Did those have the same percentage of result as residential generally, or are they generally, the appeals generally resulting in a reduced tax bill for commercial properties compared to?
So when you say same percentage of result, are you talking about a decrease?
Yeah.
So I can get that data for you.
Okay. I'm not looking for specifics. I just didn't know if you had a general feel for how overall the two different types of appeals compare.
So there's some, just like a residence, when a commercial property is appealed, we get market data from the taxpayer or the taxpayer rep. We look at that market data, and there's some properties that we agreed with, so we had to lower our real market value, which did impact in some cases, the assessed value. And there's some properties that we disagreed with. We said, no, we don't think that market data is accurate. Here's our market data. And then when those situations happen, it's up to the Board of Property Tax Appeals to determine if our value is correct or if the taxpayer's requested value is correct. And so there's a portion that stayed with our real market value. And then there are a portion that didn't agree that it should stay flat, and they have appealed it on to magistrate. And that is where the large influx of workload is coming right now, because there are more appeals for commercial property that went to magistrate this year than have in the last 10 years or so. And so that's going to be a huge workload for us going forward. And a lot of times those appeals can last 2-3 years. And like properties are put into abeyance. So if you have 10 similar properties, one is taken through the court system and these other 9 are held until this one's decided. And then the outcome of that will then influence what happens with these other 9. So it's a huge workload for us to have this large increase in commercial appeals.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Commissioner West?
Quick question. It's a little bit local for me. Wilsonville's starting to see some urban renewal districts come to their end. One of them is my neighborhood, Villaball, which is a giant development in Clackamas County with a lot of homes in it, the largest neighborhood in Wilsonville. Is that new tax revenue to us once that urban renewal district expires? Am I understanding that correctly?
So, yes. So when I think it's first, you need to understand urban renewal doesn't increase anybody's taxes. So urban renewal does not increase people's taxes. It divides the tax. And when you pay your taxes, instead of it all going to the taxing districts, a portion of it goes to the urban renewal taxing district. And so when an urban renewal goes away, that money that has been divided and going to that urban renewal now is no longer divided and goes back to the taxing districts. So an individual taxpayer isn't paying any more property taxes, but those taxing districts will see an increase in their allocation.
But what was diverted from the county and divided away from the county or the school district or the other taxing districts will now get that portion of the property taxes again once it's retired, right?
Correct.
Okay, so do our projections kind of like look at urban renewal and those larger rural areas and places with quite a bit of property taxes coming back onto our doles? Do we plan for that?
When you say projections, whose projections are you talking
Do we
about?
project forward in our budget needs or like the additional revenues that we'll be getting in the county? Do we know like, hey, this is coming back online and we're going to be getting this additional revenue? Do we look at that?
I think that's a finance question.
Sure.
Yeah.
I'm going to answer this one. Yes, that is technically part of our forecast. Most taxing districts, urban renewal, are 10, 20, 30 years in the future. So
But if we know a big one's coming due, and it's going to, right, and it's a large neighborhood of residential, high-end, suburban homes, I'm just wondering if we are aware of that potential increased revenue back to the county.
Elizabeth, would you like to answer that?
Well, I'll add that I can work with DTD, and we can work on when those end and what the collection is, and then make sure that they are in our forecast.
I just didn't know if we did it.
Not just internally. He's talking about external taxing districts, like the city of Wilsonville, for example, others that impact the county. We'll work on that offline.
Yeah,
yes.
we'll
Okay,
work on that.
thank you.
I'll add, Commissioner West, that our finance team doesn't get into the budgets of the city of Wilsonville, for instance, so you might need to contact them specifically to see if they're taking that into account.
Right, I just know that it's in the Clackamas County, so some of that revenue will come back to the county, even though it is a neighborhood in the city of Wilsonville. And so I was just curious if that assessment and those revenues coming in, how that plays in with our revenue forecast. But
And I think, Elizabeth, that we can help you determine how much is going back to each district. If you want to go down that road, just let me know.
thank you.
You're welcome.
Bronson, one last question. You had mentioned the software, new software that will be coming up, and I know that you didn't have an estimate on cost, but I'm sure that that's not cheap. Do you have a ballpark? I mean, this is millions of dollars, correct?
Right, so I'm going to answer this by qualifying with it could change, it all depends. We did receive preliminary costs from a couple vendors. One vendor, the cost was around $500,000 for the software, which included implementation, and then there is annual maintenance fees. And I want to say that right now we pay about $380,000 in annual maintenance fees for our software. And this quote was below that number. And so we received two estimates. The other estimate, it was around $1.5 to $2 million for the software. And their annual maintenance fees were between $400,000 and $500,000.
Okay, thank you. And one last question. In comparison to our neighboring counties, our software system being as old as it is, do we have the oldest in comparison, both to Washington and Multnomah County?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, Multnomah County, they purchased new software in 2015, and Washington County purchased the same software a year or so behind them.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Any other questions for Bronson? Okay. Seeing none, thank you very much.
All right, thank you.
Now we'd like to invite up our county clerk, Catherine McMullen.
Okay. Hello, Chair Carnes and Budget Committee. I'm Catherine McMullen. I am the elected county clerk and head election official for our county. I oversee 21 full-time employees across 3 distinct divisions. That's elections, recording, and records management. And this also includes the Board of Property Tax Appeals and marriage licenses and wedding officiation. I want to thank the Budget Committee today, in particular the members of the public on the committee, for their dedication to the citizens of the county and their service. I have with me here Michael Newgard, the department's management analyst, and we're going to present the budget information that's included in your packet in tab 7 and any significant changes since this last fiscal year. My management staff are also here in attendance as well if additional questions come up. A budget document reflects an organization's mission. It's a numerical expression of priorities and decisions made. The mission of the Office of the Clerk is reflected in the budget document before you. The Office of the Clerk and its major divisions build public trust through good and responsive government. The Office of the Clerk ensures equitable and inclusive access to local government services through conducting accurate and transparent elections, empowering every voice, recording real property transactions, issuing marriage licenses, officiating weddings, and preserving the public record. If we go to the second slide, you can see that the Office of the Clerk is expressed in 2 lines of business. The Clerk's office, that includes Office of the Clerk, Board of Property Tax Appeals, elections and recording programs, and then the Records Management line of business, which is an internal service providing services to all other departments and divisions within the county. The most significant difference in the overall department budget is that we're requesting general fund support to meet the statutory requirements of my office. The general fund support request totals $2.64 million and comes to 43% of our total resources. More than half of our revenue still comes from recording fees, marriage licenses, and fees to jurisdictions for conducting elections. In addition, this fiscal year, we've added notary services and wedding officiation as 2 additional sources of limited revenue for the recording division that help to offset the loss in revenue from recording fees. Michael Newgard is going to go into more detail on the diminished recording fees revenue, but ultimately, fewer properties are bought and sold and have been since 2022. Fewer transactions means fewer recordings of property transactions and therefore fewer fees. I read recently that 70% of homeowners, were they to sell and buy a new home right now, they would have to double their interest on their mortgage rate. So if interest is 7.5%, that means 7 out of 10 homeowners have interest rates that are 3.25% or lower. So no one is moving if they don't have to right now. It's a kind of golden handcuffs in terms of property ownership, and it adds to the lack of supply despite the continued demand for housing here in Clackamas County. The fees in recording and the elections division are dictated by statute, and statute dictates that the recording division charges $93 for the first page of a deed, mortgage, or lien record, and then $5 for each additional page. Statute also dictates that I charge $117 to officiate a wedding. Some of these fees stay within the recording division and others go to state and other funds as dictated by law. Our elections division budget, as you can see, is $2.9 million and covers 2 countywide elections, both the November 2024 and our May 2025 special election. This includes the most expensive and labor-intensive election, which is our November presidential election. So we have 4 scheduled election dates each year, so this also accounts for special elections or unanticipated elections, either for a single jurisdiction or a countywide election. The Elections Division budget also retains the funds to replace the mail ballot sorter, which we started this fiscal year. We've completed the RFP and selected a vendor, but the funds will not be expended until early next fiscal year with the installation after the general election. We'll have the sorter in place in advance of our May special district election. I'm also proud to report an update that we have no vacancies in my department as of the beginning of this month. I want to thank our partners in Human Resources for helping us to achieve that goal before our May primary election. And with the additional 2 FTE, we're shifting some of our temporary labor, the temporary election workers, out of special payments and into our regular personnel services. That gives us the capacity to plan, to improve, and move innovative ideas forward during and between elections. We're also cross-training records management and recording division staff so that they can step up and support specific functions of our election processes during our most critical times. We had staff that could help with signature verification, scanning, or adjudication when the need is the greatest. They can step away from their primary role for a few hours and then come back to it. We also saved on labor by having a recording specialist support the Board of Property Tax Appeals this year instead of hiring a temporary employee. This saved in personnel expenses and allowed an employee to learn new skills, so we continue to look for ways to do that. We're presenting a fiscally conservative budget while still meeting statutory needs and demands of core government services that my department provides, which includes BOPTA, recording, records management, and elections. I want to turn it over to Michael Newgard, my partner in this work, to address some of the additional details before we take your questions. Thank you.
Commissioners, Budget Committee, first of all, I'd like to thank the hard work of the budget folks in finance and our county administrator for all the collaborative work in putting this budget together. It's a team effort. Just to touch again on the difficulty of projecting our revenue right now as it's closely tied to the housing market. The majority of our revenue comes from deed records, mortgage records, and lien records. Produces a recorded document that we get $93 for the first page, $5 for every subsequent, and it's like a pie, and it goes out to all these different organizations and agencies, so on and so forth. And for us, this is a new experience for us, requesting general fund support. As in the past, just as recently as 2 years ago, we typically put money back into the general fund, $1.1 million 2 years ago. And then last year, we were allowed to keep some of our surplus so that we didn't have to ask for general fund support. But without a surplus from last year, here we are. So just to kind of illustrate context on where we're at with recorded documents, 2021, the midst of COVID, there was a lot of housing deeds changing hands. We hit a peak of 125,021 recorded documents. And as of May 1st this year, we're at 37,419. So we have a lot of external factors that affect that revenue that comes in. We feel is stabilized at this point from the sharp drop that we experienced last fiscal year. And we're going to continue to watch that and hope for, a change in the Fed rate can help with that. Other factors that affect it, foreclosures create recorded documents. Hopefully, sales and supply can bump that number up, though. So we continue to monitor that and project that out for the future. We think for now we've kind of plateaued, and that it will stay the same for hopefully the near future, and then go up.
And if you turn to the last slide, That's on page 5. You can see the significant changes. We've covered those. I do want to mention, though, I know the assessor talked a lot about property tax appeals, and we work in partnership. The Board of Property Tax Appeals is actually being renamed to the Property Valuation Appeals Board, so it's going to be more accurate. But that's something that sits within the clerk's office so that there's a separate entity hearing those appeals versus the entity deciding the tax assessment. So it's good to work in partnership with that other county department.
Thank you. Commissioner West.
You made great presentation. By the way, congratulations on another well-completed election. So thank you for that. I know you guys have been very busy over there. And then personally, thank you for the help that you gave me as I was trying to help people get in their ballots, fix their signatures, and get ready to participate in our process. So thank you for that, Clerk. Now, you said, am I right, is the rate for recording, you said $93 for the first page for title, and then $5 every page after that. Is that a set by statutory fee, or is there an ability to adjust that based on needs? Or how is that adjusted to help improve revenue issues when we see such drastic, this is a pretty drastic change. Not your fault, it is what it is. We're circumstances of these other factors. So I'm just curious what that looks like.
It is very much set in statute, so I can't increase the cost, even if it does cost us more to do the work. I am on the legislative subcommittee for recording with the Oregon Association of County Clerks, and it is something that we are looking to bring before legislature with the next session. But I'm not sure how that's going to go, but it is something that, as long as I've been working in elections and recording, it's something that we've been discussing, the need to have the fees reflect the cost of actually doing the work.
And how long has this fee been set at its current rate? It sounds like it's not easily moved or adjusted based on inflation and times.
Yeah, I'm not sure when the last adjustment was made, but I could get back to you on that.
Okay.
The last time there was a significant adjustment was to a affordable housing fee. I want to say it was about 6-7 years ago, and that added $60 to that $93 fee. And again, set by legislature. If you're ever curious about the exact breakdown, if you go to the Office of Recording webpage, we have every fee broken down and where it goes to.
Do you have any, with these changes, do you have any future, do you think any big projections or future needs that your office has with these changes?
Around?
Just your budget in general, do you have any big?
Yeah, so we've done a lot of work in the time that I've been here. We've looked at staffing holistically. We've looked at our path of the ballot from start to finish, making sure there's no bottlenecks or where the issues are to make improvements. One of the things that we're still working on is the safety and security of our facility. We're working on bringing both the Silver Oaks building with records management as well as the Cup building, which houses recording and elections, up to the same security level as our other highly public-facing buildings here in the county. And so we've been working for federal grants with that, as well as seeing where those federal grants stop and what the additional needs might be. But that's kind of where I'm at right now in terms of a full review of the department.
Yeah, thank you for that. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Scholl.
Yes, good morning. Clerk McMullen, on tab 7, page 3, you show a $1,687,034 increase. And I think that's on your general support fund line also. What's driven that increase in general fund requirement? Is it payroll and the recording fee issue, or what else is it?
Yeah, so the actual general fund support increase is because of the loss of revenue and recording. It's not necessarily an increase in expenses, it's a decrease in revenue. I don't know, if, Michael, if you have addition.
A little bit of our expense increase this year. We had asked for $600,000 last year in capital outlay for the ballot sorter that the clerk talked about. We've been going through a long, ongoing procurement. That's part of it. We are experiencing, like every other department, cost of living increases and with inflation. And We added 2 FTEs this past year, which is much needed and puts us almost on par with our near peers in the metropolitan counties for our election staff. And gearing up for a presidential election in November is typically our costliest election. And so we're budgeting normally, plus the inflation. The sorter is something that's new, and the 2 new FTEs, but the big ticket item is that sorter, which we just finished that a month and a half ago, the procurement process, and that won't be on there next year.
I see. Okay, so there's really no way you could cut an expense to reduce this 1.687 million requirement increase in general fund?
I'd say we're pretty lean right now as it is, and I think finance and budget would back me up on that.
Okay. All right, thank you. That's all my questions.
Hi, Jan, I see you, but real quick,
If I
Gary,
can
go
jump in,
ahead.
I want to affirm that the clerk's office is lean. There's nowhere to cut. It is purely a revenue issue. We knew this was coming, commissioners especially. The last 5 years, you've been warned. We've been warned this was coming. This is not a surprise. And as Michael mentioned, the clerk's office has consistently returned unspent funds to the general fund for at least the last 10 years, more than have repaid the amount that we're now giving to the clerk's office. Thank you.
Thank you. Jan?
Yes, thank you again for an efficient election. I'm understanding that there was some problem with the machines reading the back of the envelope instead of another area, so there was concern about ballots being returned perhaps. And I know other counties had problems with the post office, so I just wondered from your perspective how you viewed that. What could
Yeah,
be
we
done?
we did not have the issue in Clackamas County. We redesigned our envelopes about a year ago, and they follow standards from the Secretary of State as well as the United States Postal System. And I had one issue where one voter had their ballot returned to them rather than delivered to us. We talked to them and got their ballot back to us. I know that Tillamook County had a larger issue with that this year. But that was our lowest amount of that ever happening for us for this election. So we think that our ballot redesign all but solved that problem with the machines at the post office.
Oh, great, thank you.
Thank you. Wendy?
Thank you. This is more of a technical question. It's my first budget committee overview, so forgive me if this is for my own education. But so the contingency then was a surplus from last year. The contingency that you have in your account of roughly 600,000. Is that right? So is that restricted money, unrestricted money? I know that I think the commission has to approve that money to be there. I'm just kind of, if you could help me.
Yeah, no, that's a great question, and welcome. I'm glad that you're here. So that contingency, I believe, is the clerk lien fee, which is very specific funds that we collect that we're only allowed to spend on very specific things from law. And I'll go ahead and let Michael detail that a little bit for me.
Yeah, per statute, jumping back to talking about recording fees and that revenue that we bring in, one of the revenue streams that the clerk's office brings in is called a clerk lien fee, and it is a percentage of lien recorded documents. And statute states that we can only spend the money on very particular things, so it's what we call a restricted fund.
It is.
And that sits in the budget and gets carried over until we need to spend it on the things statute says we can spend it on, which is typically for us, by law, archival equipment. So we still do things on microfilm and other types of what be considered antiquated but still very relevant ways of storing and retaining documents. And so it's specifically set aside to help clerks pay for that type of equipment.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Anybody else? Well, thank you, Catherine and team. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Next up is our Justice Court, and we'd like to invite up Judge Karen Brisbane.
Okay, good morning, Chair, Commissioners, Administrator Schmidt, and Budget Committee members. My name is Karen Brisbane. I'm the Justice Court Judge. And we're ready for slides. Justice Court operates two divisions. The criminal division includes traffic and all other violations such as fish and game, marine, weighmaster, fire marshal. Some of these are citations that we receive at certain times of the year. We don't receive fire marshal citations all year, but in the summertime, we might receive those. But all the violations from fish and game to fire marshal, weighmaster, marine, and anything including traffic is in the criminal division. Violations all follow criminal procedures, and that's why the name is, or that's why they're in the criminal division. The budget number includes revenue from fines and fees. Included in the $3.6 million figure is pass-through revenue of $1.2 million paid to the state and other agencies as required by Oregon law. The second division, the civil division, includes civil cases, small claims, and evictions. The budget number includes revenue from filing and trial fees, and the revenue in this department is fully retained by the county. For the next slide, which is the summary of revenue and expense, I'd like to call your attention to some of the specific line items, starting with the top line, the beginning fund balance. The current projection for fiscal year 24-25 shows a 24% decrease in the beginning fund balance. The beginning fund balance is where Justice Court holds restricted revenue. The restricted revenue includes revenue for the courthouse security fund that's held by the treasurer and trust, also for drug and alcohol programs, juvenile and adult corrections, and comes from the last $16 of the revenue from each fine collected. If you look back at the previous years, 21-22 and 22-23, you can see the actuals are around $600,000 to $700,000 per year, and that's what the ending amount will most likely be for 23-24. The numbers that Justice Court projects in the budget are set many months ago, and as the revenue comes in, those numbers change. So we should be around $600,000 to $700,000 again for 23-24, but the projections are lower because we don't know how many citations and cases will be filed with the court. Moving down the column on the left, all other revenue resources. This is revenue that's received from the court's the collection agency used by the court. The number is down 38% because the court is moving to in-house collections and sending fewer cases to the collection agency. Also, Governor Kotek ordered Justice Court to remit fines in the sum of $1.2 million in December of 2023, and many of these cases were in collection status. This added on to Governor Brown's previous remission order, where Justice Court was ordered to remit fines by zeroing out the balance due to the court in the sum of $438,000 in December of 2022. And finally, Justice Court citations dropped significantly during COVID and are slowly increasing in number. And that's what contributes to the revenue, all other revenue resource number that you see that has declined. Moving down the column to materials and services, the higher number for materials and services represents an increase in the cost of security screening personnel at the court entrance, an increase in merchant fees for credit card processing, an increase in office supplies for envelopes and postage, and an increase in the software maintenance for the court's existing software program. And finally, moving to the very bottom of this page, revenue revenues less expenses. This figure represents the revenue available to the county at the end of the fiscal year in the general fund. When you compare prior years to the current budget year, 23-24, the projected year-end number is low. That's because the court estimated the final number months ago, as I previously indicated. The court continues to collect revenue through June 30th, and at that time, the numbers will be substantially higher than what is reflected on the paperwork now. The court projects revenue conservatively because we don't know how many citations and cases will be filed in advance. The court has not yet posted revenue for May or June of 2024. Of the total revenue of $3.6 million that comes in annually, about $1 million of that is court overhead, including allocated costs. $1 million to the state and other agencies as pass-through revenue for the citations that they file with the court, and $1 million to the county general fund, plus an additional $600,000, which is the restricted revenue to the county. And finally, slide 5. Oh, if you want to go back one. $9,064 is a one-time ARPA COVID payment that was received by the court. This has nothing to do with the fines and fees or civil division that the court operates. That was a one-time payment. And finally, slide 5. Justice Court entered into an intergovernmental agreement with the City of Estacada to provide judicial services for traffic and other violations. That was finalized last week on May 23rd, 2024. Justice Court will provide judicial services for traffic and other violations, and Estacada will retain its code violations. The county will split fine revenue collected by Justice Court with Estacada from existing and new citations. The county will retain fees and costs associated with collecting judgments. The county will disperse restricted fine revenue to the state of Oregon, that is $50 per citation, and the county assessment, which is the last $16 of revenue collected on each citation. That money will be retained in the county pursuant to Oregon law. There is additional information on the other pages in your packet. If you have any additional questions, I'd be happy to answer those. Thank you.
Thank you. Do I see any questions for Judge Brisbane? Commissioner West?
Judge Brisbane, good morning.
Good morning.
Maybe I don't see it clearly, but you mentioned it in your presentation that Governor Brown basically forgave or wiped clean over $1 million of.
Governor Kotek, 1.2.
Governor, 1.2
And
million.
Governor Brown, 438,000.
So close to $2 million between the two governors, am I right?
Correct.
So did the state reimburse the counties for that lost revenue?
No, they did not.
Okay. Just curious. Thank you.
Commissioner Savas?
Yeah, mine's not really a question for Judge Brisbane, but thank you for your presentation. But I just want to point out something that I've been noticing a trend here. And we used to have the bar graphs, remember? The red and blue lines that showed our trends for revenue and our trends for expenditures. And each one of these budget presentations, I can find it and see it numerically, but it'd be a great visual aid to show that almost every presentation, if not every presentation this morning, has shown an increase in their operating expenditures, which is inflation-related, so on, cost of doing services. I know that the revenue lines are going to be a little bit altered as we changing from budgeting to actuals, so I understand that. But that visual, I think, would be powerful and informing as we go through these budgets for those who maybe not be able to see that numerically. It's might be a little bit of a disadvantage, but I just want to point out that we used to have that tool in there. But that's all I have.
Sandra, would like to address that, please?
Yes. Good morning, Commissioner. This is Sandra Montoya, Budget Manager. Thank you for that. We have heard you and heard that request loud and clear, and we want you to know that we're not ignoring. The difficulty was that we've changed the chart of accounts a few years ago, and there wasn't a one-to-one in all of the funds and the departments, and so there wasn't an easy way of showing the history. in all of the departments. So what we had to do, because budget law says we have to show 2 years of actual history, the current year, and then the new year that we're going into. So we had to stop that for the time being. Next year will be the first year that we can show all of the years under the new chart of accounts, and we can go back to showing those revenue charts. So we will reinstate that process, and you'll once again have those revenue and expense charts.
Great, I'll look forward to that. But my main point is just to point out to all of you that, all these departments are all struggling. We're all struggling with inflation and the cost of doing business. So that was my point. Thank you.
Thank you. Judge Bridgman, I think that's it. Thank you much.
Thank you.
Before we continue, I thought I'd check with Gary. I know we've been going just for a little bit here, and whether or not we needed a 5-minute break. I know it's early in the morning. If committee is okay, we can continue. Looks like we're okay. Okay. All right, so we'd like to invite up our District Attorney, John Wentworth.
Good morning, Chair, members of the board, Budget Committee, and County Administrator Schmidt. I'm District Attorney John Wentworth, and if we can call up the first slide, I can walk us through our budget process. The District Attorney's Office budget, much like the budgets that you've already seen today, is pretty straightforward. Some of the numbers that I want to point out for you. First, on the first page up on the slide is that we have a budget of about almost $20 million, $19,876,000. Of that, $15,124,000 is general fund, or 76% of our budget is general fund. The other is made up from grants that we receive, and we have a child support program where we handle child support matters that is reimbursed by the federal government at 2/3 of the cost to the county. So for every dollar we put in, the federal government gives us $2 to do that work. So that's the difference that you see in that 24%. If we can go to the next slide. With regard to revenue, numbers that I'd like to point out to you include that under federal and state, there was an increase of $520,000. Part of that is from a federal grant that we received from the Department of Justice to prosecute bias crimes and hate crimes, and that will include money for a victim advocate who will be multilingual, at least bilingual, but maybe multilingual. That's what we're seeking to serve that community, and also training for prosecutors and law enforcement and the community in bias and hate crimes, so we can better identify those, we're hoping, increase our prosecutions, and be more successful in allowing a livable community. Another portion of that is state funding. We had a family support grant increase of over $100,000. An MDT CAMI grant that increased by $50,000. That's actually a pass-through. That doesn't come to my office. That's a pass-through to the CAMI fund, or to the multidisciplinary team. And then a Victims of Crime Act grant that increased over $50,000. So that's a positive for us, although if you're paying attention to the news, the federal government is having difficulty agreeing to continue to fund VOCA, and I'll come back to that in a moment. Under charges, fees, licenses, and permits, the number that you see there is primarily money that we receive from providing police reports and other discovery materials to the defense. We're reimbursed for that. So for every time we send out that information, we get money back from the defense bar in order to help continue to provide those services that are required by the Constitution anyway, so that's a benefit to us. Under expenses, what I would point out is under materials and services, you'll see an increase of $86,000. Part of that reflects allocated costs that increased by, for us, about $160,000, but we made cuts in other areas so that where we cut about $73,000 to keep that number as low as we can, so it doesn't reflect the entire allocated cost increase. We were able to save money. Our operating expenditure, you'll see, is close to $1 million at $994,000 for an increase. Most of that is attributable to a 4.5% COLA increase and a 3.5 merit increase that our employees typically receive. There's also a $200,000 batch of money that the county commissioners have generously provided to us that is opioid money that we're going to be using to fund a part-time paralegal to assist our drug team in the work that they do in prosecuting drug crimes. So we haven't yet been able to spend that money because we're working with HR to get that position identified and correctly categorized, and then put out a job advertisement for that, but we'll be doing that here shortly. And then if we go to the next slide, slide number 4, regarding significant changes, there's an opportunity here to just comment for me, and that is that one of the things that I've committed to as a district attorney is to provide better community outreach. If we go to the next slide, that would be, oh, sorry, go back, I'm sorry. There we go. Is to provide better communication to our public. And one of the things that we've done is we've completed our second annual Honoring Victims Crime event out at Liberty Plaza to acknowledge during Crime Victims Week the trauma that victims can suffer, and that there are agencies and community, both nonprofit and county-based, that provide services to victims and let folks know that we're here to help. I also created a DA advisory panel to assist me in bringing members of the community into my office to review some of the work we do and to educate them and to act as ambassadors to me back into the community so that we can provide a better voice with the community and have better conversations. I think that's important for the DA's office to do. One other thing I want to celebrate is that our Family Support Division is now working with our Family Justice Center to go in and provide child support services to victims of sexual and domestic violence. That's something that we haven't done historically. We've kept those separate, but I thought it was important to bring that service into the Family Justice Center and make that available for families who need the financial assistance. And then the last, almost the last thing, victim assistance received a federal grant, as I mentioned, the Bias and Hate Crimes grant. That's actually an $800,000 grant. So we'll be getting $200,000 a year for 4 years. That's really a huge lift to my office. And then if I had it to do over again, I would have added 2 other things to this slide, and I just want to comment on that, and that is the work that we're going to be doing to implement a deflection program for 4002. It's not quite an unfunded mandate. I would say it's an underfunded mandate at this point. I don't have a beat on what that's going to cost, but I'm grateful that we get the $1 million that we're getting. That's going to be great, but I think as we go along, we're going to be better able to identify where the gaps are and where we're going to need additional funding from the legislature, and I'll be working to lobby for that on behalf of Clackamas County. And then one thing I was remiss in not adding is that we continue to try to provide better, we've talked a lot about software today, we're trying to integrate our case management system at the DA's office with the report writing system that most of our law enforcement agencies use, so that when a police officer writes their report, all that digital information is transferred into our database for accuracy and efficiency. Right now, when those reports come to us, there is manual work that's done to enter that data into our database. We're that close to having it done, but it will create an immense efficiency for both my office and for the police agencies. And I'm very excited to get this underway. We're so close. And I sheepishly look at Gary because he knows we've been close for about a year. So I keep wanting it to happen, and it will. I will say this. We've been very, very successful in the DA's office, and I know this isn't the role or the place to do all of this, but I just want to say, I do say with pride that we are the safest large county in Oregon, and that has come to be. That hasn't always been the case. And that's taken effort on law enforcement's part, it's taken effort on my office's part.
That's a goal that I don't see it as just being achieved, but I want to not just maintain it, but make it better. I'd like to extend the gap there. And so doing some of the things that I've talked about with the grants, acquiring the grants, and leveraging technology those are some of the things that we're doing to continue to do that good work. I do want to brag that we do have Oregon's DUII Prosecutor of the Year this year. That's DDA in my office, Tiffany Escover. And we do all that by keeping, one of the questions that this group has was, what are our operating costs? Give us a measurable. And I'm proud to say that per county constituent, our office cost is lower than both Washington and Multnomah County, significantly lower than Multnomah County. So we continue to do that and do good work. To anticipate a question that might come, I just want to say we're not done. As I've mentioned to this committee 3 times now, this is my 4th time, we have been understaffed, and I continue to work with the county administrator to make that better, and that gap has closed tremendously, much to the benefit of the community and the people who work in my office. 2008, 9, and 10 were very, very difficult for the county and for my office, where we had to do more with less. And that just kind of continued for a while, and that has been challenging. I don't like losing staff to, I can go work somewhere else less hard for more money, right? I'm proud to say we're not losing staff at the rate that we once did. And that's a reflection of this body's generosity to give us what we need to do that work. We have a ways to go. One of the things that I went to the legislature about this last session was to encourage the legislature to fund our victim advocates. 75% of my victim advocates are grant funded. So every 2 years, every 4 years, they have to wonder whether they're going to have a job to do their work. And I believe that our victim advocates are an essential part of what the services that my office provides. And we shouldn't be living year to year on whether we're going to have that service. So that's something that, as we continue to have conversations, if I had my druthers, and I'm just sharing that with this committee, I'm not asking for it this year, I would like those staff that we have to be county employees and supplement with grants, not make that the bread and butter of how we fund those positions. I just think they're too critical. And I think we have support staff needs that still haven't been met yet. The county continues to grow. We continue to have new crimes that come online. There's work to be done is what I'm trying to say. So I'm not asking for that now because we're able to fund many of those positions that I need right now through grants. That helps us tremendously in this budget cycle. But I just want to put that on the horizon, and my office is no different than the offices you've already heard from. I'm happy to answer any questions you might have. Oh, boy.
Thank you. Yeah, sorry, it's a race. I think I'll go to Commissioner Savas.
Yeah, thank you, DA Wentworth, for your presentation and the great work you're doing in keeping Clackamas County the safest county, large county in the state. So,
thank you.
I have a question, but from a budgetary standpoint. You mentioned HB 4002. I'm really kind of wondering what the timetable is to implement that. And is that somewhat an unfunded mandate? And what are the realities around us doing that? I mean, is it more than your office? What are the requirements, again, forecasting out what that's going to cost us to implement?
That's challenging to answer. The state used a formula that I had no hand in deciding, and by both Washington County's estimate and mine, we are underfunded, especially when you compare, if you look at what we receive compared to Marion County and Lane County, we receive less than they did, although our population's higher. We do get $1 million. Selfishly, one of the things I'm very happy about is that there's a mandate that part of that money is used to add a deputy district attorney to help prosecute those crimes. That was essential. Bill Stewart in my office is the person who is our coordinator in this effort. What I can brag about is that I think we're going to be up and running by September 1st, which is when the new law goes into effect. And Clackamas County, through actually the effort of Bill Stewart primarily and help from the sheriff's office, we had a lead program that was very effective for a while before ballot measure 110 came into effect and kind of cut the legs out from underneath it. So the structure and the philosophy has always been there in Clackamas County. We have a community court where we're going to send folks, we're going to wrap them in services. I think we have a real opportunity to do good work. I'm skeptical that the $1 million is all we're going to need. But we're not going to know until it's actually up and running and we start seeing how many citations are coming in and whether we're able to provide the services that folks are going to need to be successful on this program. We'll see, but I can assure you that I'm going to be on top of that and have no interest in the burden of this being exclusively on the counties, because the state has handed us this, and I'm grateful that they're giving us this opportunity to actually deal with addiction in a way that we haven't had in the last several years. But there's work to be done, for sure.
Just one quick follow-up and just a little bit of insight. Which department coming forward should I ask what their role is going to be? And so they're deflected from, to, let's say, drug treatment. Let's say that's where they are sent to, right?
Yeah.
On the receiving end, who's going to provide those services? And certainly not your department, right?
No.
So what would you, give me some guides of where you think they would land and
Yeah.
what department is going to see that burden?
So my friend Mary Rumbaugh is probably one. We're already partnering heavily with Mary and her department to ensure that we can provide those services. My hunch is that we're going to be identifying services that we didn't even realize that we're going to need. But I've been working, the lipstick is going to be overseeing all of this. And so Rod Cook has been in the middle of this. Mary Rumbaugh's been in the middle of this, as well as my office and law enforcement. So that's where I would look.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner West.
Thank you, DA Wentworth. I need to add a little bit to your statistic. It's my understanding, according to the Oregon State Police records, not only the safest, largest county, there's 36 counties in the state of Oregon. We are the 8th safest overall. That means, and we probably surprise a lot of people on how many counties we are safer than when we are in the top 10 and we're part of the Portland metro area. I think that the work that you do has created a contrast that is evident to all of us when you look at the tale of two counties, to the county of our north, to Clackamas County, to the south, and just what the proper and just worldview is that informs the work you do compared to what we had been dealing with to the north of us. I think it's very clear that we are on the right track by prioritizing public safety the way we do. And so thank you for your work. I think a lot of times when we think of public safety, we think of the men and women that wear the badge in our communities. And absolutely, right? Of course, but a big component of that is the DA's office, and also something we're acutely aware of after this last election cycle. And we have a new DA in Multnomah County, which I will personally say I am very ecstatic about. That's my opinion. Are your grants right now that fund those victim advocates or other staff that you have that you rely on from year to year, are you getting all that funding? Are you seeing any reduction in grant funding for any of that staff right now? And are you just making it work, or where's that pain point exactly? Because that concerns me to have that lack of continuity with your staff.
Thank you. That was something I failed to mention, and I meant to. I assume political reasons, about every 4 years we hear from the federal government that either VAWA, the Violence Against Women's Act, or VOCA, the Victims of Crime Act, is not going to be fully funded or funded at all. And much of what we receive in terms of federal funding comes from those two grants. And so, I have staff who, they've been working for me for quite a while, but they read the news just like I do, and they worry that they're not going to have a job should the federal government decide not to fund those programs. And then we receive state funding as well, which, that's more tenuous than the federal grants, I think. And so this is more of a, how essential do we want our services to really be? I made the pitch to our legislature this last session that we've continued to treat victim advocates like a luxury in our system, and they're not a luxury, they're a necessity. Victim rights are administered through my office, by my office, through victim advocates. That's how that work gets done. So that's a constitutional issue that we provide by grant funding. So I mentioned 75% of my staff are grant funded. If those grants went away, I have 3 people to do that work for the thousands of cases that we prosecute. That's inadequate. So that's my worry. You know, if we're, and even at that, at the number of staff I have, if I lose 1 staff member, that is a huge loss to the office. It's already difficult when someone goes on vacation or they're on maternity leave or paternity leave. That's already a challenge. My worry is that if we actually lose a position for good, the effects that'll have on whether we can satisfy our mandate to provide the services that we have to provide.
I think it's clear historically that your predecessor especially, and early on yourself, you guys, I mean, you made that dollar stretch. You guys really, like, without a complaint, y'all just went there and kept us safe, and you did the work. And you're really collaborative with, from the feedback I've gotten with Gary, our administrator, and the Board of County Commissioners and the budget members. I can see James nodding his head. Like, you have been an awesome partner.
Thank you.
With us in this process. And sometimes probably we didn't give you what you needed quick enough, in my personal opinion. So I want to make sure that, like, we are really acutely aware of what your needs are, because I trust those are the real needs, and it's going to immediately impact our community members' lives in a positive way, and continue to keep the good numbers going forward about how safe we are. So thank you for sharing your needs moving forward with us, and if you have any, please don't hesitate to ask.
Thank you, I appreciate that.
Thank you. Wendy?
Again, this is a technical question. It's not necessarily about you, but what I hear you saying is if we lost state support, it would be a big deal. If we lost federal support, it would be a big deal. But when I look at the single line item, it lumps all of the federal and state support onto one line item.
Yeah.
So I can't measure the magnitude of what you're talking about at just a glance. And, you know, of course, over time, I'll learn more about your department and how these things work. But I think, to follow up on Commissioner's Sava's comment earlier, when we were talking about another department, is that if we could split that out, at least federal and state, then I could say, oh, okay, that's 2 cents, or, oh my gosh, that's $1 million. You know,
Right.
Or your department is dependent upon federal dollars more than it is state. And frankly, you know, all of that matters if it's a big number. So I guess my question is maybe in the future, if we could just talk about, or at least split out these revenue categories a little bit more between federal and state, then it would just, I wouldn't have to ask the question. I could just look at it and say, oh, that's what he's talking about. I thought, just a suggestion.
Thank you.
Thank you. And just checking, James, did you get, you're good? Okay. I'd like to also thank you, and with what you've already heard from some of the other members, is being in the metro area, but still being, that is a huge for me as a citizen that lives in this county. I'm going to go home and share that with my wife tonight. That is a great, you know, benchmark to meet. Also, I thought it was pretty innovative, you had included, that you had a booth at the county fair.
Yeah.
Who does that? Normally, if you go to the DA's office, might not be a good thing, but going to the county fair and just getting to be able to ask questions in a comfortable environment is a good thing. So I say, and did you get a lot of activity there? Did a lot of people stop by?
We did. I had one gentleman come up and say, I don't understand why the DA himself isn't here. And I said, I'm right here.
Yeah.
This is me. And he was stunned. It was a wonderful experience. We've never done that before, but it's a way. We've been through a time, and we collectively, law enforcement, where there's been a lot of narrative about it's us and them. right? And that's been a real challenge for law enforcement. It's been a challenge for my office. And one of the things that has been important to me in this last term, and I will continue to do, is to allow the public to see we're people too. I live in this community. The people who work for my office live in this community. We're human beings. We're not a faceless bureaucracy. And one of the things that we were able to do, and that's so important, is to be out in places like the fair or neighborhood night out celebrations to show that we're regular people and we're here to serve. That's what I'm trying to convey.
Great. Well,
Thank
I
you.
hope that's something that you can continue. Commissioner Savas.
Just another kudo for all the great work that you've done. Now, I wanted to point out the good relationship, apparently, obviously, between yourself and the sheriff's office. I really appreciate that coordination. It allows you all and us to benefit from a public safety standpoint. So to you and to the sheriff's department, thank you.
Thank you.
Great. Any other questions for DA Wentworth? Okay, I think we're good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Before we convene with the sheriff's office and her team, I would like to take just a 5-minute recess real quick, if that's okay with everybody. And we will reconvene in 5 minutes. Okay. Again, welcoming the sheriff's office, Sheriff Angela Brandenburg and her team.
Good morning, Chair Karn and Budget Committee members. I'm Sheriff Angela Brandenburg. Joining me today is Under Sheriff Jenna Morrison, Under Sheriff Jesse Ashby, and my Finance Manager, Nancy Artman. In the room is also my management team, who are here to help answer questions should we at the table here not be able to answer some of the questions if the Budget Committee has those. Before I address the Sheriff's Office budget, I want to highlight a few of our accomplishments over the past year. I know it's been mentioned before about the safest metro county. So the second year in a row, Clackamas County is the safest county in the metro area. In fact, it's the safest of the 5 most populated counties in Oregon. Over the past year, crime trends in the county show a drop in property crime, significantly a remarkable drop in car theft of about 31%. In 2023, the Sheriff's Office hired 67 employees, including 52 sworn. This far surpassed the hiring of 29 sworn in 2022. As I stated during last year's budget hearing, paying our deputies what they're worth is necessary in order to retain our experienced and skilled deputies while also attracting highly qualified applicants to this incredibly important and challenging work. I also want to thank the Board of County Commissioners for approving a new collective bargaining agreement last year that did just that. We are already seeing the results from this contract. As of January 1st, I have sworn in 30 patrol and jail deputies, a third of which are experienced officers joining us from other agencies. As of today, the Sheriff's Office is staffed at 93%, with only 3 vacant jail deputy positions and 6 vacant patrol deputy positions. In June, we started a new jail substance abuse program, which is aimed at reducing recidivism, like our medicated assisted treatment program and our GED program. The program utilizes a well-respected and widely used cognitive behavioral program, focusing on changing behaviors that result in a person's involvement in the criminal justice system. And when the time comes, this program works to connect those transitioning out of jail with community-based sobriety programs and employment. So far, 136 individuals have completed the jail substance abuse program, and I'm looking forward to evaluating the measured outcomes of our efforts. And in 2023, a Safe Place Family Justice Center reached its 10-year anniversary. Since opening in December of 2013, partners have worked together to improve the lives of survivors of domestic violence, sexual assault, human trafficking, stalking, and elder abuse through empowerment, coordinated service, and collaboration. Over the past 10 years, A Safe Place has provided support and advocacy in over 32,000 visits for services. Over 4,000 survivors have received help in applying for protective orders through A Safe Place's video court program. And last year, in 2023, 56% of protective orders filed in Clackamas County were from a safe place. The great work happening at a safe place, Family Justice Center, is helping to create safer communities and is absolutely saving lives. There are many more accomplishments in 2023. However, with the limited time that we have, we'll move forward with the budget. I first want to say thank you to the county administrator for working with me over the past few months to reduce our $5.2 million shortfall in the county's current fiscal year for my budget, the 2023-24 budget of my office. As you may recall, last year I advised the Budget Committee that the county's budget would be at least a $5 million short, and I was assured that if that occurred, the county would cover the shortfall. To date, the county administrator has covered $2 million of the deficit and asked me to submit a supplemental budget in June for the remainder. For the proposed fiscal year 24-25 budget, CCSO followed all county finance requests, which included accounting for general fund vacancy savings, budgeting on a 3-year average of actual costs, and implementing a new county-approved indirect costing model. In order to meet operational needs of 24-25, an increase of general fund support of $9.6 million was requested. A part of this increase resulted from costs following the new CCPOA collective bargaining agreement to include the cost of living increases in the personnel line. I met with the county administrator, who agreed to provide an additional $6 million in general fund support and requested that I not include $3.6 million in my proposed budget. Instead, the county administrator directed me to use the supplemental budget process to request the $3.6 million as needed throughout the fiscal year. I made the requested deferment in the amount of $3.6 million to balance my budget. However, these funds will be needed in order to meet the operational needs of the Sheriff's Office. Over the past several years, including my testimony at last year's budget hearing, I've informed the county administrator that 13 additional full-time employees are required, sworn employees, are required to provide the personnel to safely operate the new county courthouse. For the past 2 years, the county administrator asked me not to add these positions to my budget. This year, he's directed me to wait until December to use the supplemental budget process to request these additional positions. The necessary full-time positions are 12 deputy positions, 1 sergeant, with a cost of approximately $3.2 million. During the fiscal year 23-24 budget deliberations, CCSO, along with county finance, was directed to participate in a performance audit. My office fully complied and cooperated in this process. The audit was published 3 months ago, and the audit showed no significant findings for CCSO. We have actively been working with county administration, county finance, and county council to set timelines for both county finance and CCSO to address the recommendations. In collaboration with county finance, one of the recommendations has already been implemented, as I said, by the creation of the indirect costing model that has been applied to this year's budget. And a complete copy of the performance audit report, for those who may be zooming in, watching this later, can be found on the Sheriff's Office website. Now, my finance manager, Nancy Artman, will go through the budget slides, and then we'll be happy to answer any questions.
Good morning. Before you is a slide depicting the amount of general fund support to each program within the Sheriff's Office budget. Of note on this page is that there are 2 additional FTE that were requested this year. This is specifically for contract cities. There is no burden to county general fund for those positions. For the sake of consistency and to follow along, we are going to be focusing solely on the 24-25 budget, which is shaded in gray. Beginning with beginning fund balance, you see a number of 80,904 posted. That is the amount that is restricted by code for the alarm program in the Sheriff's Office. The remainder of beginning fund balance is currently sitting in a liability account, and that is an accounting measure in collaboration with county finance. Those funds will be recognized at the beginning of the year once we have expense that goes along with. Moving down to the federal, state, local, and other gifts line, this is primarily our funding for parole and probation. The opioid fund settlement allocation to the sheriff's office is found there as well. And then we have some other operation grants such as Bureau of Land Management, traffic, and Forest Service funds. Next are charges for fees, fines, licenses, and permits. This includes payments for the contract cities, our concealed handgun licensing program, the Public Safety Training Center fees and fines, and alarms, fees and fines, and Public Safety Center fees for usage. Moving along, all other revenue sources is primarily the payment for the contract with the Enhanced Law Enforcement District for personnel services. There are some other small figures in there to include interest and auction proceeds for vehicles that are sold. The other interfund transfer line, you'll notice a significant increase from years prior. That is an agreement with Bridges to Change for parole and probation for transitional housing, and we wanted to call that out and have it be transparent within our budget. So that is why the change for this year. Below that is our general fund support to the sheriff's office, and that is the sum total of our revenue sources for Fund 100. I'll pause for just a moment so you can make any notes or take in the revenue piece. Moving along to the expenditures, you'll notice a 7% increase in personnel services. This is driven by the new cost agreement through the new collective bargaining agreement for the Peace Officers Association, and also the standard COLA. Under materials and services, you'll notice that there is only a 6% increase. This is reflective of the $3.6 million that we cut from our budget to make it balanced, which the sheriff spoke about in her introductory statement. Significant increases include cost allocations, which went up almost $890,000 for the portion due to the to the Fund 100 rather, and our indirect costs, commonly referred to as administrative overhead within the budget, which are an increase of 1.7. Those two figures together are an increase of 2.6 million to materials and services. So you can see how this isn't really reflective of our true cost as we made those reductions. The next category is capital outlay. Oh, one other thing I would like to point out to you before I move on to capital outlay is that the $1.6 million increase is just $61,000 more than our year-end projections. So I think it's safe to say if you took the figure that is posted, the 27.9 million, and we added back in the 3.6, that would be our inflationary factor. This represents a truly flat materials and services in actuality based on where we anticipate ending year-end this year. Capital outlay, increase of 1.6 million. This is primarily for capital projects within our IT and also represents some vehicle costs as well. And I'll pause a moment. Moving to special payments, the $232,920 is primarily subrecipient awards for victim services, and that's through parole and probation. Sorry, going back to an old term now. It also reflects funding for HIDA dollars, which are high-intensity drug trafficking areas. This money used to be in the levy. We transferred it as it is a grant. We transferred it to Fund 100 so that all the activities within the levy are purely levy funded. So this is the first year that that dollar amount is represented there. And lastly, for transfers, that is the money that we provide to the juvenile department for using the Donald E. Long Center for Juvenile Housing, and also for our contribution to commercial sexual exploitation of children eradication efforts. Next slide, please. Oh, thank you very much. You're ahead of me. I shouldn't have doubted you, Tony. So the next slide that you'll see is the levy. A word about the beginning fund balance. What we stated last year, and it is holding true, is that you will see a trend of the beginning fund balance for the levy increase for about 2 to 3 fiscal years, and then it will start to diminish. You can already see the impact of that if you look at contingency that is budgeted for the upcoming year, 24-25. It is down considerably, budgeted at $5.8 million from $7.1 million the past fiscal year, and that is due to the sheriff's careful planning of ensuring that we would have funding to get us through the cycle of the levy and not have to go back to the voters to ask for an increase. So that was planned out so that we could cover all of those costs and maintain that. You will see that dip down, both beginning fund balance and contingency will dip down beginning this year considerably, and will continue to trend so as expenses will increase while the revenue will not. The federal, state, local, and all other gifts represent the taxes received from the levy by the sheriff's office. The charges for fees, license, and permits are actually a portion of forest products reserve, which you might find a bit odd for the sheriff's office. We did too, and we did some research with colleagues in finance and found that there actually is an Oregon revised statute that creates a tax code area, and all districts that are within that area receive a portion of those funds each year. Then lastly, you will see interest posted as all other revenue sources. It is budgeted at $165,000 for the upcoming fiscal year. Year to date for 23-24, we're at $324,000. We budgeted according to a 3-year average, as was the direction received in the county budget manual. So that's why you see a lower amount than what we're collecting this year. So again, I will pause for a moment. Moving along to expenditures. You'll note a 13% increase. Again, this is due to the Peace Officers Association collective bargaining agreement and customary increases in cost of living adjustments. Materials and services are budgeted down by $636,000. Again, this is in line with a 3-year average. Looking at fiscal year 21-22, if you look at the very first column, you'll note $2.8 million in materials and services, and that number averaged with the fiscal year 22-23 and 23-24 account for that lower balance in our budget. Capital outlay includes payment for body-worn cameras, so this is where the Axon contract is paid with levy dollars. It also includes funding for projects at the jail, software, and some vehicle expense. Again, just to point out, we did move out the HIDA dollars from here, so that would have appeared also in materials and services cost. So that does account for a bit of the decrease in addition to that 3-year average. And then again, to highlight the contingency, you can note that from the current fiscal year 23-24 to the anticipated amount for 24-25, there is a decrease of $1.2 million or 17%. I would expect at least that much of a decrease year over year, if not more, by the time that we hit next fiscal year. And that will be a result of actual cost posted. Again, for the benefit of the group, although you all know finance fairly well, this budget is the plan. The budget tells us where we anticipate the expenses. The actuals will be posted during the fiscal year as the cost is accrued. Moving on to page 5. This is the fund for inmate welfare. The revenue comes from phone and jail commissary reimbursements. So the counties receive a portion of that back. And the $1,500 is anticipated interest, again, using the 3-year average. You might ask, what does this fund pay for? It helps those in custody to complete their GED so that they have options upon release. It purchases supplies for those in custody, personal supplies, care items. And also, we have a contract for services through H3S for behavioral health. Moving to tab 6, this is where the CCSO forfeiture funds are housed. And just a brief note to distinguish, the inmate welfare and forfeiture dollars are in separate funds from Fund 100. You'll note their fund number at the top of each page. Forfeitures are in Fund 209. And the reason for that is that their primary funding source is not general fund, or rather not a majority of general fund dollars. In this case, it's strictly not, bless you, not general fund. So they are posted in a separate fund. We would say that we probably need to look at parole and probation. There have been discussions with the county administrator and with county finance about separating them out and placing them in a separate fund. Currently, they are 38% funded by general fund, and it would just make for a more transparent view for you all and then for accounting throughout the year if they were separate and not combined into Fund 100. But that's just an aside for your information. So why you see beginning fund balance posted here and you did not in Fund 100 is because these restricted dollars are in their own separate fund and they're handled differently. So you can see again, now we're going to look at 24-25 column, that $563,000 is beginning fund balance. Those are restricted forfeiture dollars carried forward. We anticipate collections at approximately $350,000 for the upcoming year. And the $20,000 represents anticipated interest for those dollars. Traditionally, this has been used for public safety equipment. And we have the benefit of using some of these forfeiture dollars to build a robust jail management system. So similar to the district attorney who spoke earlier, we are also very excited because that system is near completion and will be implemented and has been developed specifically for the jail to handle their records, financial and otherwise, in terms of not county budget, but in terms of tracking commissary and things of that nature. So it'll be a robust system where everything is in one place and it's built specifically for the jail to meet their needs. So we're excited to be able to have that on board soon, and we were able to use forfeiture dollars to pay for that, so there was no impact to the county budget. Page number 7, this is Fund 230, which is a special grants fund. This is a county fund. However, it is used to disperse dollars to different departments. So what you see represented here for 23-24 is the $200,000 of opioid settlement dollars. And this was used to cover jail medical costs. And we were thankful to have those dollars to help us cover the increased costs for jail medical. Slide 8 was included, or pardon me, on page 8, this slide was included for comparative purposes. I imagine to show if we were to slice out parole and probation before they joined the sheriff's office, what some of those costs would be. So county finance was kind enough to put that together for us to give you that comparative. And on page 9, those were the ARPA dollars that were provided to help to cover some of the costs associated with personnel during the COVID period. And that is the end of the budget. Sheriff, would you care to complete the presentation, and then I can answer budget-related questions?
Significant changes to our budget are that, as the sheriff mentioned, we are now 93% filled, so that does take up any vacancy savings or a large part of vacancy savings that we have maybe anticipated in the past. The new Clackamas County Peace Officers Association collective bargaining agreement has also increased the amount of our personnel over the next 3 years, the life of the contract. We depleted the ARPA funding that we had for the lost revenue recovery. And I think Nancy may have misspoken when she was talking about the different funds, because I think she just switched the two special payments. One being, I think the 1.4 was the ARPA dollars that we depleted for this year, using that for the jail medical, and the opioid would be the other 200,000 that we're using for the jail MAT program. We also implemented the county-approved CCSO indirect cost model. And again, the jail did receive part of the opioid settlement, which is paying for our MAT, which is medication-assisted treatment program. It's our opioid program.
With that, thank you very much. We'll take your many questions.
Okay, Sheriff Brandenburg, thank you. And team, Commissioner Savas, you're up first.
Yep. Thank you for the presentation. I have a few questions, so I'll start with the last one. Under Sheriff Morrison, 93% staff. Can you tell me how many FTE were lacking? I mean, across all funds, departments, contracts, so forth.
I can answer that for you. So we have 44, as of yesterday, was that the 28th? 44 total vacancies across the agency. So that's probation, all sworn, non-sworn.
Okay. And Sheriff, early on, you mentioned that you hired 63 and 52 of those were sworn. How many retired? How many were lost? I know it's always a moving target. It's typical, but.
Yeah, so it's 67. I don't have that answer for you. I can tell you that, I can get that for you.
Okay.
If you would like.
I guess what I'm really looking for is the net gain.
Oh, yeah,
right?
we're definitely gaining.
Okay.
So with these numbers, it's been a long time. I think when I was under sheriff, we may have touched once for about 10 minutes a fully staffed agency. So we are very close to doing that, and very proud of the work that my staff has done. And not only my staff to get these vacancies filled, but county HR and the partnership that we've had with them, it's been fantastic. So I want to thank county HR for their work with us.
Excuse me. Sorry to interrupt, but I believe, Commissioner Savas, last year we were 75% staffed, and now we're 93% staffed. I know that's not the exact number that you want, but
Okay.
that gives you an idea.
That does help. So when we calculate that, are we including the contract city FTE?
Yes, that's across the agency.
Across the, okay, great. So with that clarification, going back to, as you know, over the years, I've been curious about how the city contracts are calculated, and you mentioned you're going to add an 2 FTE for the contract cities, right? Has there been a renewal of that, a new contract, and how much of that has been covered in new fees or a new contract annual cost? And where could I find that? On which page can I find any reference to the contract cities?
Commissioner, currently you will see the contract city cost in charges, fees, license, and permits on page 3. There is an increase of 2.5 million. The majority of that is all related to personnel costs. Additionally, if you would look further back into the budget, beginning on page 21 rather, through page 23, you'll see the budgets outlined for the cities. To answer the other portion of your question, we have been working collaboratively, an effort led by Under Sheriff Ashby with each of the 3 cities for which we contract. We're updating the IGA. County Council has had initial review. We're very close to sending it to the cities for their attorneys to review. It is an update of practice, current language, and it does include a full cost recovery model for costs. We are treating the cities as though they were a department within the sheriff's office, and by that I mean they pay a share of all costs, personnel, cost allocations, administrative overhead through our indirect cost model, a share of vehicles, training, uniform, you name it. If there's a cost that we can identify that is linked to a deputy or another sworn member who is staffed in the city, they're going to be charged for that cost. It is very transparent, and I'll be very happy to share it with you once it is completed, but it'll certainly meet your needs and being able to identify how they're being charged and what costs are built in. So we definitely heard the prior requests of wanting full cost recovery and then wanting transparency.
Well, yeah, so thank you, Nancy, for that, and I appreciate yours and Under Sheriff Morrison and others, the sheriff herself, with regard to several years of my curiosity into how that is calculated. So it's not necessarily that it's transparent, because that's a lot of detail that the public's really not going to look at. But and I think even last year we talked about this a little bit, like what the apportionment of the sheriff's salary is embedded into the cities, because overall it's being managed and so forth, and all the staffing requirements. So and then what software, how is that calculated? What mechanism in which calculates all that out? I'm just curious from the standpoint knowing that, I just have the concern from the taxpayers that are paying for law enforcement, whether it's ELED or the levy or however, even those that are in the city of Wilsonville, maybe they're overpaying, I don't know. So those are the things I think are really sensitive, but I do have a deep curiosity as to how they're calculated. And I think in past discussions, it was not really clear that some of those costs, those overhead costs overall, were actually in there. As a matter of fact, I think the statement was a year or so back that it was not. So I'm not that interested in the detail of the language of the contract or how it's negotiated, but really how it's calculated from a cost standpoint.
Certainly. And the indirect cost model, which we developed in collaboration with County Finance, captures those costs, which include costs for IT, costs for the Office of the Sheriff, so her administration team, human resources, all of those behind-the-scenes things that go into running the sheriff's office. So those are apportioned to the city contracts as well. And that cost, because it is a common factor across our organization, is based upon FTE. So if you were to look at the indirect model, we can identify a cost per FTE, which was then applied to the cities. The same holds true for all other costs that we assign to the cities, whether it be CCOM, C800, cost allocations, any of those other things, materials and services costs again, such as uniform, vehicle costs. It's all based on an FTE factor. So you'll see all of that, including costs for all of us seated at this table, being charged out to the cities.
Okay. And to the commitment this board has made, or I mean, to some degree, the Budget Committee as well, but I just want to reiterate my understanding, I won't say I can speak for my colleagues on this, but my understanding of our commitment to make sure that any cost that were not met by the budget, that were actual, would be, that we would fill in those gaps, right? So I heard the sheriff's presentation in regard to the supplemental budget process, and I think that when we actually have a cooperative engagement of the numbers and into the things we talked about yesterday,
Yes.
and we can see that, I think we can rely less upon supplemental budgets because we'll have trends, and the sooner we get that going, we'll have, be able to see trends and address it. I think there'll be a good faith effort on our part to make
Agreed.
sure that. But it takes good faith, of course, often all parties, all individuals. But the sooner we get that done, the better.
Absolutely. And we intend to implement, beginning July 1, the new city contract costing. So we'll have data starting then.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Commissioner West.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everybody. Good morning, Sheriff, Under Sheriff Morrison, Ashby, and Nancy Armin. Thank you so much for being here. Just to piggyback a little bit on Commissioner Savas's comments, we touched a little bit on this yesterday, but as we deal with this portion of the budget, I feel like it's still applicable. I understand that you still don't post expenses and revenues in a timely basis. It's not only an issue of accountability and transparency for the CCSO, but it impacts the county's ability to accurately forecast projections. What's it going to take to change that, as was directed or recommended by the audit, to make sure that something that should have already been done, since we talked maybe about this even last year, begins to be implemented in the future so we can clearly and accurately know exactly what your needs are and be good stewards of the public's money? Can you address that question, please?
Yes, and I would say I would love some specific examples as to how we're not meeting revenue and expense offline outside of these proceedings. We have several transactions that are pending approval by county finance currently for posting revenue. We create a record as an accounts receivable document that goes to county finance, and the great AR team posts that revenue in a timely manner. Our billings are up to date. The ELED, which was yesterday, is current through April. All of the expenses and transactions that we are able to process have been processed, so I'm a little bit perplexed as to why it's a recurring theme that this is brought up.
That's fair. Can Elizabeth Comfort or Cindy Becker to address maybe some of the concerns we're having with how these things are being posted?
Yeah, Commissioner Elizabeth Comfort, Finance Director. So Commissioner Savas brought up about trends and how we can look, each year, how the funds are being, the dollars are being spent, the revenue being collected. And this is an issue that we've had the last several years, expenditures not posted timely and revenues not posted correctly. I know that you've been working with our grants team because we have some revenue to post from grants going back to August because the journal entries, there's challenges with those, and we're attempting to work with you guys and your accounting team. So this is a constant problem, and one of the things that we discussed with the LED, we talked on yesterday, is that Administrator Schmidt gave you until the end of May to get everything caught up. We wouldn't be in that case and requesting by the end of May if everything was current. So I am concerned about the lack of recognition that things are not posted timely, that the transactions are not timely. I'm glad to hear you say that ELED, the reimbursements are current through April, because we see very sporadic and limited reimbursements. So the general fund is really carrying the ELED, and those reimbursements from the ELED fund, which the taxes have been collected, are sitting in the ELED and not reimbursing the general fund on a timely and frequent manner. So this is a frequent discussion, so I'm surprised that you're not recognizing that. So I think maybe we have more work to do with side by side. If we're seeing these, we're bringing these to your attention, and it's not being recognized. So I offer the opportunity to meet frequently.
So if I might respond, I can't speak to or change history. So I can say that we are current this year. We have met the request of the county administrator. We are set to have everything that we possibly can have processed by the 30th of this month. We are working with the grants manager to work through new requests for additional information, which we are happy to comply with, but changes in the process midway are not helpful. We have been compliant, we have been collaborative. I really would like to focus on the future and moving forward, and that is what we have done and what we continue to do.
I appreciate that, Ms. Hartman. Some of my concern also is that this isn't new, that we brought this up last year. And then because we just could not figure out how to get on the same page, which we share that desire to do, we went out and this body here went out and recommended we do an audit. And in that audit was done by Moss Adams, which is a very reputable company that is well-known in doing this type of work. And the robust audit was done so that we could do better practices and achieve our common goals, which I know we both share in public safety. But it's my understanding that neither you or the undersheriff met with Moss Adams, only your finance manager did, Sheriff, when we were bringing out those findings, or when they wanted to meet to go through the audit. I'm wondering if that's true, or why you and your undersheriffs did not meet and only Nancy Artman, your finance manager, did.
Thank you, Commissioner West. So we fully engaged, we fully cooperated. Nancy Artman works for me. She is me. And she is the subject matter expert for our office. We fully complied. And we provided all the necessary documents. I don't know how many hours that you spent on that, but I can tell you that we fully complied. And to address what the issues that we're talking about, it sounds like we're trying to go down the same path as the ELED yesterday. My commitment is to fully work with county finance, the county administrator, to address these issues, which this audit is a performance audit, and it was of the sheriff's office and county finance. So for both of us, there are issues on both sides, and we're working together to get that done. County Administrator Schmidt has convened our group. We have set timelines. And I'd like to remind folks, or if they don't know, this report came out February 13th of 2024. And I ask that you give us time to work. It's my commitment that we work, that we address these issues, and I believe next year will be vastly improved.
I appreciate that, Sheriff. Frankly, I would push back a little bit that you're the elected sheriff, not Nancy Artman, so you are not the same. I know she represented you, but in something that an audit of this magnitude that confirmed many of the issues we were having last year and the findings when we were involved on the county side, it would have been nice to have you and your undersheriffs have that equal participation, in my opinion.
Commissioner West, I can tell you that Moss Adams' report also indicates that we complied, we worked with them. And so, you know, I think your criticism that I didn't personally engage when my finance expert, person who knows, is providing the information, is working in conjunction with them to provide everything.
I appreciate that explanation. I wanted.
I guess my question for you is, what would you have had me done differently?
If I was the elected sheriff, I would have been engaged in those very important meetings with my staff or with an undersheriff also.
And I was engaged with my staff with a request from Moss Adams.
Okay, I'm gonna address another issue that or questions I have. Yesterday, you opened the meeting. We're not here for ELED, but you were potentially down 3 positions. Is that correct, Sheriff? yesterday. You were down 3
I'm sorry?
positions. Yesterday, you opened yesterday's meeting for the ELED that you were down 3 positions.
That's not true.
Or potentially could be down.
We were fully staffed in the ELED per your instructions last year.
Just for clarification, there was something that said like we have to not fund 3 positions, not cut, but I'm trying to just make sure I understand correctly.
And this is for the ELED?
Yeah, yesterday when you opened the meeting.
Well, I believe that it was about positions that the ELED cannot fully fund.
Fund, right.
All of the 36 positions, fully fund based
Okay.
off the ELED support.
Okay, and then, and I know that the ELED, there's, some of that comes from the ELED, some of the funding comes from Fund 100. It's a little bit kind of back and forth how some of these different positions are funded. Over the last couple weeks, starting on May 7th and then even into last night, there have been, it looks like a Christmas tree list coming through in charges. Last night, $100,000 additional came in purchase orders. Before that, just in the last couple of weeks, a total of $642,000. We bought 3 admin cars, a Subaru, a Ford F-250, a Ford F-350. We bought almost $12,000 in dog helmets. We bought $25,000 of office chairs, and your building's half empty. We bought some flip-flop tables for quite a bit of money, some e-bikes, some laptops, and I don't know what the next $100,000 that came in last night were specifically. We're at $750,000 as of last night. I don't understand how these were essential needs when they're all coming in last minute, especially when we've talked about some officer positions not being funded. I don't understand kind of the value system. So we have an ELED that is also partially funded by Fund 100. And then just even optically, now we have an onslaught of purchase orders coming at the last minute spending down taxpayer dollars. But we're being told that we don't have enough money to fund these positions.
So I would like to address that, if I may. First of all, the issue with the ELED and Fund 100 is something that we're looking at this year because there's a shortfall. This isn't an ongoing practice. And we're not here to discuss the ELED as a whole today, so I will not address the ELED as a whole other than to talk about the personnel piece, which is fully funded and paid by the district itself. So I'd like to put that issue to rest with hopefully some clarity. Secondly, the expenses to which you're speaking, Commissioner, are standard cost of doing business. And if you look back historically, you will see that not only the sheriff's office, but all departments tend to spend in this trend, and it's to get needs met with revenue that exists as we're looking at expenses across the year. I'd like to point out just comparatively, if you were to look at H3S, their April expenses, and this is not to pick on my colleagues, this is simply to point out a trend across the county. Their expenses in April were $3.7 million. Their similar expenses to date in May are $7.6 million. In DTD, $681,000 in April, $1.8 million in May. The Sheriff's Office, $414,000 in April, $588,000 to date in requests for May. With that $588,000 that we spent in May, which is not out of line with other months, if you were to look, we have lulls and we have months that are more expenses are posted. We're still $1.2 million under our budgeted materials and services budget. So I don't see the issue at hand. With all due respect, we're spending according to our budget or even under budget, and we're doing consistently what is done across the county. This is not a CCSO issue, and it's certainly not a Christmas list.
I'm just curious from our finance department and from Cindy Beckert if that's a standard practice, the way we're seeing this come in currently for the sheriff's office.
Oh. Well, I've heard of that, spending at the end of the year, but I've not seen it quite like this before. And I know that the other departments have other funds that they're spending. This isn't a purchase order rapid spending at the end of the fiscal year. They do have a lot of grants that they pay out, and they have a lot of contracts, so I would be hard-pressed to compare other departments to CCSO, as H3S is not really comparable at all to CCSO.
Elizabeth, it's standard practice of conducting business to look at where you're at certain points in the fiscal year and make the expenditures needed for your office or for your department or program. I think anyone in this room who runs a budget would say that they also do that. You cannot possibly meet your needs early in the fiscal year when you don't know what other expenses are there and what other revenue you're going to bring in. And while this body committed to making us whole when our budget was short to begin with, developed by not our team, we also needed to be practical and look at what our revenue was versus our expense. We're purchasing public safety equipment. We're not purchasing anything grand. And to say that that's not a necessary expense, tell that to the people in this room who are managing teams with folks out there every day putting their lives on the line. It is necessary.
I don't believe I said.
And I don't want to debate this. I think that's an inappropriate use of this forum. And I really don't want to have another discussion as we did yesterday, which was quite inappropriate. I would like this to be a more civil.
To be fair, Nancy, these are public dollars that we're all accountable for, and public dollars were spent on it. So I'm sorry the transparency makes you uncomfortable, but unfortunately, these are fair topics to talk about.
The transparency doesn't make me uncomfortable, sir. It's the implications.
I guess, here's the thing.
Commissioner West, I need to address this. This is the cost of doing business. This is funding the sheriff's office, as you all agree, funding public safety. We are under budget. We've talked with the county administrator about spending money on the things that our teams need to operate. So to be scrutinized, I don't know if any other department is being scrutinized on their third quarter spending. I would hope so. But what we are doing is we are running public safety, getting the necessary equipment that's needed. So I think the inference that Nancy Artman is talking about is that we're spending money down because the money is there. And that's simply not true.
I appreciate the explanation. I just think it's apples and oranges compared to like the spend down from these other departments compared to the purchase orders of a number of items at the very end coming in just at the end of the year. And part of the problem here is business as usual is somewhat broken. That's why we have an audit. That's why we're bringing the level of scrutiny we're bringing. The level of business between these two entities has not been productive in a way that I think has been good for the public dollar, while everyone shares the exact same goal of making sure we still remain the safest large county in Oregon and make public safety a priority. Business as usual, just because it's always been done that way, doesn't mean it's the best way to continue to do this. I think that this just brings a question a little bit when we were told yesterday potentially that we wouldn't fund 3 positions, and then now I see all these big purchase orders come in at the last minute. I think it's a fair question.
So Commissioner West, this is apples and oranges. So the personnel is covered by the ELED. So, and what you're talking about is materials and services, which we have a line item budget that we are under budget on. And so respectfully, it's apples and oranges.
Okay.
Thanks for the question.
I will, I know there's more questions. I'll pass the floor.
Yeah, I'd like to move forward. We do have, and I've seen all of you that want to speak in order, in fairness, James Rhodes.
Thank you and good morning. I have a couple simple questions, I believe. Regarding ELE, so I'm referencing the 100 general fund summary of revenue expense. And you mentioned that in all other revenue sources, which is projected at 7.1 million, that's an ELED. So that's the pass through from ELED that comes through, right? And so then there should be on the expenditure end through both personnel services and material services, that same amount that goes back out, right, to the ELED.
The materials and services you wouldn't see in Fund 100. that is paid in the ELED fund itself.
So the 7.1 is just purely personnel?
Purely personnel.
And so then, if I'm looking at then tab 10, page 31, that is the more detailed breakdown of that pass-through to the ELED? Again, that's tab 10, page 31, titled The Law Enforcement District.
Yes, yes.
Okay, so that's how that passes through. But here it shows that some of that money does go to materials and services.
And what that represents, and I appreciate the question, is the amount that the ELED will not be able to cover for this fiscal year. That is the anticipated, at the time that projections were put together for this budget development, both in capital and materials and services.
So, as we're looking at it, the $657, that was the administrative overhead that was added to the ELED last year?
The allocated cost?
Nope, that's the administrative overhead that was added
The
last year.
internal indirect costs?
Yeah.
Okay. So that's under materials and services at $657,000?
Yes.
Okay. And then it's a minor difference, but these numbers don't actually line up exactly. So all the revenue here is $7,017,000, and on this end, we're at $7,152,000. There's just a slight discrepancy, and I'm not sure if it's a big error or problem. I'm just trying to understand the difference between the two. Again, I'm reflecting on the first page we were looking at, which is the general fund summary, versus tab 10, page 31, looking specifically at the all other revenue.
So you're comparing 23-24, I believe, to 24-25, or are you looking at on that page 3, are you looking at the column for 23-24?
On page 3, I'm looking at fiscal year 24-25 budget.
So they're not the same? The numbers on the back document on page 31, those represent projections for 23-24 for year end.
I'm sorry, so looking at the fiscal year 24-25 budget column, it's $6,787,000.
Yes, yes. So
I think that
Yes.
you're telling me that on the summary and revenue expense page, the first page, page 3, that number 7 million is not, it's not all ELED.
it's not exclusively ELED, no.
What is the other?
There's interest included in there and also auction proceeds.
Okay. So back to tab 10, page 31, that expense that I was referring to was actually from fiscal year 23-24, the $657,000 under material services.
Correct.
And it's not reflected in the budget for 24-25?
It is not. So what you're looking at in column fiscal year 23-24 projected year end is at the point in time this was put together was what we believed the ELED would not be able to absorb for the end of the fiscal year. So those costs traditionally, materials and services and capital outlay, would have been transferred through a journal entry process between funds, and they would have been absorbed by the ELED. But the ELED, as you're well aware, has reached the point where with its tax base, it cannot cover all the costs. And that is why you're noting those things in that column. By June 30, we'll have a better sense of what it actually cannot absorb. But as of now, it is paying cost allocations, its full personnel burden, and the indirect cost that has been applied to it.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
A few more questions.
Of course.
Back to page 3, and again, the highlighted column, fiscal year 24-25 budget, down under expenses, under I think transfers, $260,000. You had mentioned that that's going to juvenile to support a short list of things, the large one being to support renting, if you will, Donald E. Long beds.
Correct.
My understanding is that the juvenile department's not doing that anymore. So can we confirm that we're paying them for renting beds, that they're actually not doing that anymore?
Certainly, if that is not current practice.
I don't know if they're doing something else.
Yes.
My understanding, and we haven't seen that budget presentation yet, but looking ahead at the material, I don't know that expense is necessarily valid.
So I believe that there's, and I will let them speak for themselves. But I believe that there is another model in place if it would not be Donald E. Long because the need still
So
exists.
the expense that was provided to you by the juvenile department?
It was.
And it may not be for Donald E. Long, but it's probably for something else similar?
Correct, because we can't house, as you're aware, juvenile and adults in custody in the same facility.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
And then talking about materials and services, you said there was a $2.6 million increase to this budget a year.
That's correct. So,
And you anticipate another 3.6 in a supplemental budget by next month or so.
What is before you is 1.6 million is the increase of materials and services. If you look at the column next to the 24-25 budget, it's what I was trying to state was that it's not reflective of our full materials and services need, because in order to submit a balanced budget, we reduce materials and services by 3.6 million, which are not reflected here. But I wanted to overlay the 1.6 by indicating that indirect costs alone for Fund 100, which is the administrative overhead, is 1.7 million. So it itself is more than that amount. So by reducing the budget by 3.6 million, it doesn't clearly indicate what the needs are for materials and services at the sheriff's office. At some point during the fiscal year, the sheriff will engage with the county administrator at the point which we recognize a revenue shortfall, and we will go through the supplemental budget process to ensure that our budget is whole for 24-25.
But kind of what we're saying is this isn't, though balanced, is not really complete.
That is accurate.
Okay.
Yes, it is at least short by 3.6 million.
Okay. Next topic, I'm sorry, capital outlay. We talked about it, there's a significant increase. We talked about it in this line. It's also increased in ELED, save for another day, and in the levy as well. When you listed out these increases, like I understand there's a giant increase in the levy fund, but that's largely the body worn camera program. I understand that. But each time you mentioned some vehicle expenses, what are some vehicle expenses in more detail?
I can address that. So we have had the opportunity to hire someone from PBOT, actually, that has a vast knowledge of fleet, so that was very helpful. And what he has done is he has looked at our entire fleet as a whole, which I think that's something that we've been lacking for years. And at present, 30% of our fleet is over 150,000 miles. And so we find ourselves, even though we have tried to keep up with the increased needs of our fleet every year, we find ourselves in a spot where, frankly, we have too many cars that are too old with too high mileage. And so the request was much higher, and I said, I appreciate your request, but that's completely not going to happen. And so we did what we believed was the minimum we could do. We also have, a vast amount of new hires that require vehicles, and so it's kind of a perfect storm of we have vehicles that are aging out, we have new people that need vehicles, and so that is, and even with this, which I understand looks like a huge increase, it still will not meet our need going forward, and we will continue to have vehicles that are too old on the road, and frankly, we're hoping that we, obviously, we maintain safety, we do a lot of maintenance and repair, but our fleet is like I said, it's 30% over 150,000 and only getting worse.
And if I might also point out, if you were to look at the budget in the column 23-24 amended budget for both materials and services and for capital outlay, those were both reduced significantly when our budget was developed for us last fiscal year.
I'm sorry, which column? I'm looking on page 3.
Yes, page 3,
amended.
column 23-24 amended budget.
Mm-hmm. Materials and services at 26 million.
Correct. And also the capital, those lines were reduced. For example, materials and services in the jail alone was reduced by about $1 million when the budget was developed. So when you look at the increase, it really isn't comparative to what it should be because it's a step back from a reduction that we received and then trying to make that up. And on top of that, there is an additional reduction that we had to take in the budget. So there are a lot of factors at play.
So that's recouping there was a reduction in 23, 24, so that's recouping that reduction plus the addition.
Yes, yes. So it appears to be more than what it actually is. But yes, you stated it very well, and that is accurate.
Thank you. And then lastly, currently have 44 vacancies, and there's three funds for the Sheriff's Office, ELED, General Fund, and Levy. How are those 44 vacancies, where do they exist? How many in ELED? How many vacancies General Fund, and how many in Levy? Can you break those out for me?
The sheriff has that information, or under sheriff, and I will defer to them to answer that question.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I don't have all the specific numbers. I can tell you that we're 80% filled up in the levy. I can tell you that the patrol deputy positions are levy, so the 6 patrol are levy. The 3 jail deputies are general fund. But I don't have it broken down further than that, but I can get that for you if you would like.
Yeah, so is it fair to say that in the ELED, there are no vacancies? So that's 0.
Oh, that's correct.
Okay. And then, so of that 44 split between general fund and levy, we don't know how many are,
And parole and probation is in that as well. So out of the 18,
44?
If you could wait just 1 minute,
Sure.
I might be able to get that information for you.
I can get that information. Yeah, if you just let me know how you want it broken down, I can send that to you.
Yeah, so my question is, how many vacancies, of the 44, that's the number I'm working off of, how many exist in the ELED, which I believe to be 0? How many exist in the general fund, and how many exist in the levy?
and parole and probation. So we have parole and probation funding as well. Positions.
Which is part state funding, but part general fund.
Right.
So that really would fall under the general fund category.
Not all of them, because a majority of their vacancies are in their state funding.
Okay, so that number 44, though, includes PNP. Okay, so, right, so then let's break it down the 4 ways, please. And one of them we know to be 0.
Yeah, we can get that for you.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Under Sheriff
Happy to
Morrison,
use-
your mic is far away, so we're getting a flash from the guys in the back. They couldn't hear you.
Good. And turn it on when you're ready.
Thank you. That's the end of my long questions.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. I see all of you who are waiting. Up next, Commissioner Scholl.
Good morning. Good morning. My questions are on your 100 general fund. You mentioned, Nancy, that your fund balance was $80,904, but you mentioned something about a liability account. I don't see where that's at or how much that is.
Yes, thank you, Commissioner. You won't see it here. It is in the county general ledger in an account. So it is something that is held in trust by county finance. And once we have expenditures to go against it, you will start to see it post in revenue and expense. It'll be pulled from the liability account and posted to Fund 100 in parole and probation.
Okay, and is it the amount of that liability account significant? Because
It is,
your fund balance is
yes.
only 80,000 and some change.
Yes.
Okay.
So the 80,000 that is listed there is from the alarms program, which is restricted by code.
Gotcha.
The total beginning fund balance, had we been able to post it here, would have been $3,037,758.
Okay, there we go.
So there's
Okay.
a little more than 2.9 million of restricted beginning fund balance for parole and probation.
Understood. Okay. In your, this year's budget, as I recall, you had a federal grant in there that was a little over $8 million, as I recall. Does that sound right? No, okay. So on tab 10, page 7, on your 230 special grants funds, it's blank. What do you anticipate this year for grants? Shouldn't that be reflected in 230?
So
Special grant
for, here in 230, it's for specific special funds such as ARPA dollars
Okay.
or opioid dollars. That's hard for me to say. We don't anticipate, there hasn't been any indication that we'll receive further funding in 24, 25, so that is why nothing is currently budgeted there.
Okay, then on page, tab 10, page 11, a question here. Under the general fund support in budget FY 24-25, $81,768,000 and change.
Yes.
Okay, but in the first column, under FY 24-25, general fund 100 is $123,646,000.
Yes.
Tell me what's the difference now between those two columns?
That is all revenue that is in Fund 100 versus the portion of general fund support received. So
Okay.
the 123 million is all revenue sources for Fund 100, which would include parole and probation grants, fees,
I see,
fines,
okay.
everything that we discussed today.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, Cindy Becker.
Thank you. Good morning. There's some things that have been said that I'm concerned about, and I feel uncomfortable that they're being left standing. First, has been several times as mentioned about the indirect distribution plan. The indirect distribution plan. There was no plan that was actually submitted to finance. There was a conversation. There were questions by the sheriff's office about, well, can you tell us which things are indirect and which things are direct? So it's been implied that there was a plan that was approved by finance, and that is not the case. As a matter of fact, when you look at the budget and all the things that should be indirect, I think there's actually a shortfall in terms of there are other things that could be indirect, such as the wellness program. $2 million there doesn't appear to be an indirect. So I just want to clarify that yes, our sheriff's office has done a lot better in terms of distributing overhead. Clearly, it's done a lot better from last year, but it was not a formal, officially approved indirect plan by county finance. And so I just want to make that clear. The other thing that I think is important, I know while some may not want to talk about it, but the fact that, $700,000 in purchase orders have been made in 1 month at the end of the year. It's very strange that a department would wait until May to make all of these purchases, 40,000 of which are office furniture, so it's not a question, there's a lot of things here that clearly directly support law enforcement, absolutely. So one question is, why would you wait until May to actually purchase these? And I think there's a comment where we're not quite sure what our budget would be. Well, again, how could you not know what your budget would be? The last piece of this that I want to talk about is the levy. There are significant dollars that are in contingency, and at least I think they're looking at $7 million, probably more this year. There's been comments made this year and in the past that we want to make sure we have enough levy dollars to go the course of the levy. And in doing the calculations about what the levy thought would be brought in, what the levy has brought in, and what the sheriff's office has spent in the levy, there's a lot of money left over in the levy. So I'm unclear where Nancy and company are getting the notion that we got to save the money to make sure we have enough. There is plenty of money in the levy, and there's plenty of that money not being used. Thank you.
So there was a lot there. I'll address the levy. The levy is for specific law enforcement services. And as you can see by our staffing, we will be staffed up before year end. And the levy funds many things, more than personnel, and our body-worn camera program is a significant cost. And it's a cost that's going to be going up. And I don't know, do you have the numbers of what that is? It's significant. And so the levy dollars don't expire. And being a good steward of the levy dollars is to use those dollars for what it's intended. And it's for the purposes of positions, for people, for these programs. And the money does not expire. It's not about being left over. It's not a grant. It is additional dollars from the people of this county for additional services, law enforcement services that this county can afford. And I know the public members on this panel appreciate that these dollars are additional, and they're for these positions that we are showing that we are adding to our services to ensure that you get a cop when you call 911. So these levy dollars aren't left over. It's being a good steward of these dollars. And I know we've had disagreements with that. That's one of the talks of this performance audit with the county and with the sheriff's office, is to talk about that. This is probably not the forum right now, but I've had county council provide opinions on this, and I'm confident we are using the levy dollars the way the people intended, and I'll continue to do that. And I've been very clear with the county administrator about those dollars. If you want to have further discussions, we can certainly do that, probably not here.
Sheriff, I appreciate that. There's positions that were supposed to be funded in the levy that have never been filled. And so, again, the question on the fact that there's continually a large contingency, it's unclear how those dollars are going to be used.
Yeah, and those positions, I am working hard, my staff is working hard. In 2022, we had 29 positions, sworn positions, because these are sworn positions, hired, or 22 in, I think 20 and 22. 52 sworn last year. We are at 30 this year, sworn positions. So we will be fully hired in this levy. Not to mention, you see, as Nancy Artman talked about, the dollars are coming down. And so the significant increases to this levy that we never anticipated with administrative overhead costs. So we know that, okay. So the information I'm getting from the undersheriff is that our Axon body-worn camera program is going up 3 times the amount. And this is something that we haven't anticipated, but this is why this money is intended for these purposes, to be managed for these things. And we can look at our budget and we can try and anticipate these costs. We never anticipated the indirect costs hitting the levy. We built in COLAs, and there's a lot of burden on this levy, and this levy is on the generosity of the public, of the people of Clackamas County who want a cop to show up on the worst day of their life. So managing these funds, I'm very passionate about it, being a good steward of these funds, which we will continue to do. I know we all want the same thing, and I'm looking forward to the conversations after budget, for next year's budget.
Okay,
And I can address the indirect cost model. Frankly, I find it surprising that we're not being seen as collaborative. We created an indirect costing model. We shared it with the team, and they pointed out this is, that there's some things that we did wrong. And so we fully accepted that feedback and readjusted our indirect costing model, applied it to our budget. And so to hear that we're still doing it wrong is a surprise to me, because we had agreements, we had discussions, and I'm surprised that we're being told that that we didn't do it right again.
Okay, you've been waiting patiently. Wendy, you have the floor.
Now is your time to educate the new person.
We look forward to it.
Okay, so how would you, procedurally, if you had something that you wanted to use the contingency for, how would that occur? I mean, is it already budgeted, or is it already allocated? I mean, if you could explain to me.
That's a great question. So contingency is placed in a line item where it's clearly identified. So if we were just to look at page 4, you can see that the budgeted amount for fiscal year 24-25 is 5.8 million, down from the 7.1 the year prior. So contingency is held in a specific account line, and if we were to determine, let's say there was an unexpected cost that the levy would pay a portion of, we would come before the county in a supplemental budget process, ask for that to be recognized as usable revenue and usable expense, and the cost would be posted. So it's basically a savings that you can use during the fiscal year versus reserve, which you are putting away and you can't touch that until a future fiscal year. So it's placed in the budget to show what is remaining after all expenses anticipated are covered, and it's available for use should there be unanticipated costs.
Okay, so it's really flexible money. It's money that could be used for anything.
Only for the intent of what the levy covers. And,
Right.
and to be honest with you, that money really needs to be maintained in order for us to be able to cover all the costs in the outlying years of the levy, particularly with the increase in personnel as an example. So we have a well-deserved, historically high collective bargaining agreement that was approved. Our personnel costs are increased markedly. So the levy will pick up its portion of that as well. So to answer your question, it can be used for any cost that the levy would ordinarily pay for, but it is held in trust, if you will, to cover future costs.
Are you saying future costs or future shortfalls?
Yes to both. So it will get us to the end of the levy. So we don't anticipate that there is going to be a shortfall of the levy by the time that we get to year 5.
Oh, it sunsets in 5
Correct.
years, which is what year?
We're in year, it started in 2022, so we're heading into year 3.
So what kinds of shortfalls would you anticipate or are you worried about?
It's the increase in cost based on a stagnant revenue base. So our costs, again, we couldn't have imagined personnel because it's the clearest example. If you were to look from last year to this year, it's a 13% increase that we did not anticipate, but again, well-deserved increase. So it's things of that nature versus can we meet the needs that we are aware of currently. So at this point in time, I'm not concerned of a shortfall because we've budgeted and planned accordingly. It's if we were to we'd have to look forward in time in a larger snapshot. So going into the next cycle, all things being equal, there could come a time where we would be facing a shortfall and we would have to make some decisions because, as you can see, just in 1 year, contingency went down by that 1.2, sorry, I wrote on top of it, by the $1.2 million. So next year, to cover simply the 13% increase in personnel, contingency will go down even more. So when we come before you next year, you'll notice that it is markedly lower.
Do you know how much? Because you did say that when you opened that you expected it to decrease. So what I'm hearing you say is that it's to cover the COLAs and the increased personnel costs that you've already approved.
To cover all the costs. So personnel, materials and services, their portion of indirect cost allocation costs, which they must pay a share of the costs charged to us by the county. So it's all of the costs of doing business, not solely personnel. And when you look at materials and services, we noted significantly that body-worn cameras alone will go up 3 times the cost currently. And if we look in capital, which is now budgeted at $1.2 million, I would say a third of that will be increased by 3%, or will be increased 3 times over, and that will carry forward. But generally speaking, in materials and services, you have an inflationary factor of between 4 and 5.5%, and that's contracts, that's just purchasing goods and services. So the standard cost of doing business at some point in time, and in the not too distant future, which I don't have my forecast with me today, I apologize, so I can't tell you what year at this point. At some point in time, the expense will outpace the revenue.
So do you think that this will be used by the sunset date of the tax? I mean, do you expect that to go that quickly?
I believe that we will get through this levy cycle, and then the sheriff will determine at that point in time how to move forward. And that's all things being equal at this time.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
And I think it's important to note, for your information, that the levy is almost 100 positions that it funds for the sheriff's office, including jail patrol, detectives, body-worn camera program, positions in our internal affairs unit, mental health medical beds. So it's a significant portion of the sheriff's office that simply, if it were not there, public safety services in Clackamas County would look vastly different.
yeah. I mean, this is another topic, but I worry already about the assumptions for pension obligations and also OPEB. I mean, with the assumptions at 2% COLAs and 2% inflation rate, I mean, and numbers that date back to 2022. I mean, I'm very concerned about what you already owe, frankly. So.
Okay, thank you. All right, so moving forward, Commissioner Savas, then West and James Rhodes.
Yeah, thank you. I know we're over our schedule, so I'm going to be brief, so no need to reply on my city questions here, but one question I do have right away is that the one deputy, that was one new deputy for each city?
One new deputy for Happy Valley and Estacada.
Oh, in Estacada, okay. So tab 10, page 25 is the City Happy Valley page. And I'm looking at the 23-24 amended budget and then the 24-25 budget operating expense line. So 4,000 or 4,678,000, whatever that number is, and then 5 million, a delta of about $400,000 approximately. So that is an increase. All right. Okay. So having that said, when I go to Wilsonville, Wilsonville city contract, it is lower by about $400,000. So I don't need to respond today, but all the more curiosity. I don't want to belabor our discussions much today. So
it's actually a quick response.
Sure.
I can put your curiosity to rest. So the way that the budget is built for personnel in each of the cities is based upon the allocated position report that we get from the county budget office. So it's who's assigned at the time the budget is built. The actual cost will be posted based upon who works throughout the year. There is a bump in March and September, so personnel may change during those periods of time, but only the actual cost will be posted to the budget. So that could be significantly higher if they get seasoned employees, or it could be less if they have newer employees.
okay. The other thing struck me based on a question that Mr. Rhodes had asked, was drawing my attention to tab 10, page 31, which is the ELED, Enhanced Law Enforcement. You know, in the budget line there, I mean, you've got $6-7-ish million, you know, it's balanced, so on the revenue expense side. But I'm wondering, again, it's a district, And we heard yesterday, not questioning that majority of the funds are, posted to account 216, which is ELED, that special standalone jurisdiction.
Yes.
And some of it is posted in 100, which personnel. So my question is this all personnel only?
What you're looking at budgeted for 24-25 is solely the personnel costs, correct?
Okay. So let me ask a question so I just understand it. So the budget we looked at yesterday for ELED and adding this together is the total revenue?
No, if you were to add this to yesterday's budget, you would be doubling the cost.
Okay.
So this is posted in expense and on reimbursement in Fund 100. It is the contractual obligation of the county to contract with the district. So this is where the expense is captured for personnel. It is reimbursed from the ELED.
So it's a pass-through?
It is, absolutely, yes.
Okay. All right, so thank you for that. Now, I'm going to, again, it's my last thing I just want to say, and this is, please take all this constructive, and I think that, and I understand semantics. Sometimes I misspeak. We all do that. Sometimes the meaning of the word has a different context, or on what department you're in or what kind of line of service or work you're in. So I do hear earlier today and yesterday about the posting that's done. And last year and this year again, regarding the posting, it's becoming more clear to me that it's not just the fact that it's posted, but where it's posted, right? Is it appropriately posted here and appropriately posted there? When it came to last year's discussion with regard to making that annual one-time adjustment for the allocation, Nancy, you had mentioned that you do it annually at a one-time thing. You allocate the cost for the levy and charge that to the general fund. And, getting those all spread out. So the allocations between the levy, ELED, the cities, all of that, that's done one time per year, right? That's what I recall last year. So my hope is that, again, you don't need to respond today, but I think that's where the confusion is how it's allocated and when it's allocated. If it's allocated on a monthly basis, reporting, posted, allocated properly in the right place, that's what we would like to see. I think I'm correct in that. So I do want to point out finding number 6. I'm going to read finding number 6 just to cap this off, and I'll be done speaking here. And so of the audit, finding number 6, it states this. Finding, CCSO did not allocate indirect cost, including administrative overhead, to the Sheriff's Office Public Safety Levy or the ELED prior to fiscal year 23. Allocating indirect costs to programs is important to accurately reflect the full cost of providing services and promote equitable distribution of shared expenses across all programs. That's the finding. The recommendation, we recommend CCSO continue efforts to develop a departmental indirect cost allocation plan for allocating costs to the levy and LEED in alignment with county policy. This plan should be reviewed by county finance and approved by the county administrator. The ELED's cost allocation plan should be approved by the board in accordance with IGA requirements. Now, part of this is general fund, part of this is ELED. I know it's kind of mystery, but the point being about that seeking that monthly posting in the right places and allocated so we can see it all at once. And if the typical posting of or request for purchase orders is done, let's just say, it's sprinkled out through the year, okay? We can see that and anticipate that in the budget preparation, right? And I know, we all know that, for most of us in this room know that a lot of the work is done January, February, March, so we compared the budget. So I would assume getting a late batch of purchase orders, whether it's practice or not, or whatever it may be, I'm not making an issue out of this today. But I think that it's not a lot of money. In context of the full budget, it's a dribble, right? But my point is that be able to see it and know it in advance would be helpful for all of us. So I'll stop there, and thanks again for your service.
Commissioner West.
Thank you. I don't think my question will take that long. I know we're over time. are we seeing an increase in overtime expenses? Potentially, am I understanding that correctly, that we're going to see overtime be projected to be higher by around $2 million than the previous fiscal year?
We can get you those numbers. But I can tell you, because we're training, I have 30, I think it's 31 patrol deputies in training.
Okay.
So that's doubled up cars, that's writing reports, overtime. So there's going to be a little bit of pain now, but will be able to show you that our overtime will go down over time because we'll have the staffing that's necessary. So it's a little bit of a pain point right now because as a former field training officer, you spend hours with new folks learning how to write reports or late calls, and then it's double court. So it's a little painful right now, but our whole goal is to have our reliance on overtime reduced so we can use those funds in other areas.
Okay. I think that does answer my question, that you guys are filling 91% of your vacant swarm positions, which means somebody has to help get those people onboarded, and that may be the additional cost to overtime temporarily. Is that right? Until we kind of get everybody up to speed.
That and the increase in personnel costs. So as personnel costs increase, so does the cost for overtime. So, yeah.
Is it fair to say we should see that overtime number go down the better staffed you are? Because then the workload's spread more equitably?
That is our anticipation,
Okay,
yes.
perfect. Thank you.
James Rhodes.
Thank you. Back to the levy. It is a balanced budget, but the contingency is incredibly large. So I find it just a little concerning. You talked about the body-worn camera and program, it's going to triple in cost, which was unanticipated. New contract, so personnel costs increase. I suspect that the contingency, $5.8 million, has been largely achieved by vacancy savings. And the reality is that if you anticipate that these other increased costs I mentioned, body-worn camera and such, are going to increase to the point that that contingency will be completely eaten up and expired by the end of the 5th year, then it would be fair to say that the levy is not going to be able to support all the things that it wants to. There's going to have to be some sacrifice or some program or some personnel that will not be fulfilled because costs are exceeding revenue. Is that right?
So I think that that's a potential, and I want to address the word concerning for the contingency. I call it comforting. I call it being a good steward. I call it planning for the future. The levy funds don't expire. So they are used, they can continue to be used. So at the end, let's just say we come to the end of our levy and we go out to the voters and it doesn't pass. We have operating costs to get us through, to work with the community to find out what they want. What level of service do they want to fund? So in order to manage the levy, the contingency that's there is not to cover the general fund shortfall anywhere across our budget.
I didn't mean general fund shortfall.
Yeah, no, I get that. I'm adding that in there. This is for the services here. I'm adding that in. That's not on you, right, Mr. Rhodes. So it is being a good steward of these dollars. And we know that there is a large impact to the levy budget that we never anticipated, and it's the personnel costs. That's what we're hearing across the board here, of all these budgets are being impacted, these costs, inflation, everything's going up, and the levy is no different, and it's being hit by it. And so to ensure that we can fund those almost 100 positions and programs is vital to delivering the public safety services to this county. So it's with that eye that we look at that fund, the contingency fund. I call that being a good steward.
I understand that, and I appreciate. I want you to be a good steward of the money. But as a citizen, not a member of the ELED or this budget committee, but just as a citizen, we voted for that levy to support those very specific functions over that 5-year period. I don't I want you to be a good steward of the money in the form of, I want you to deliver those services over that 5-year period. And I understand, I could be understanding that sometimes those costs may exceed what we anticipated, and there may have to be some sacrifice that you can't fulfill every one of those promises. And then you'll have to make the best decision possible. What's your priority, as it should be. As a taxpayer, I'm not interested in you saving my money for potential services that might be served beyond year 6, 7, or 8, whether I pass or don't pass a levy on those years, right? But the dollars that you're collecting are to be spent for those purposes during the life of that levy. I know they don't expire, and I know that you can save them. But from a budgeting perspective, that contingency seems to be overinflated, right? And it just seems that that money, instead of growing in a contingency and anticipation of years 6, 7, or beyond, that it's designed and asked by the voters to be spent on those things during that 5-year period, which are very important. You've talked about how important they are, and they are important. So not filling those positions, I understand that there may be hiring difficulties. We can't just hire people. I understand that, right? And so there are going to be vacancies. That happens. But to the tune of $5.8 million, unless you are specifically saving that to pay for a body-worn camera program, or like I said, you're having to make choices of, instead of hiring people, I have to save that money to pay for other programs. If that's what's going on, I understand, and then that presents to me as more of a balanced budget. But just to say you're saving it in case we don't get another levy, you're saving it for year 6 or 7, that's not the intent. I mean, the budget to be balanced is to be spent on the things that you understand what I'm saying. I'm repeating myself now, but that's what I find troubling about this. And so I'm trying to solicit from you the reality that there probably is a priority here, and that you are needing to select, for example, perhaps paying for a body-worn camera program as opposed to filling certain positions, because that's what the money requires. But I don't like to hear that that you're just saving it for year 6 or 7 or beyond the life of levy.
Thank you. I appreciate that clarification. So we know there are costs that are going to burden the levy, and we need to get to the end of the life cycle of this levy. And we are doing projections. We are looking at all of this, but all of this has an impact on the levy. And as a good steward of the levy is spending the dollars for what you intended. So, because what I'm hearing from you is that you're saying that we should be spending this money on positions that the general fund already covers. Is that what you're saying?
No, this has got nothing to do with it. The levy had very specific criteria of what this money was to be spent on, and it should be spent on those things.
Yep.
So fill those specific positions, jail beds, IA investigators, fill all those things, right, and spend that money on those things for the levy. I'm not talking about backfilling. This has nothing to do with the general fund or staffing the general. This is spending levy money for levy purposes, right, as opposed to, and I'm trying to allow you the outlet that perhaps you are prioritizing this money for something. But it seems like if that's the priority, if it's for a body-worn camera system or anticipated costs, that $5.8 million is a lot of money in year 3 of a 5-year levy to be saving all this money, right? And I don't want to hear that you're saving it for year 6. I want to hear how you're being a good steward of the money and spending it all exactly on what the levy is asked for.
Yeah, no, I hear you. I sense you're a little frustrated. But what I'm telling you is that, and what Nancy Artman told you, is that you're going to see this in the beginning, and that it's bigger, and it's going to go down from there, right? We can't onboard, I can't hire every single deputy on day 1 of the levy. It's a process, right? And then in this challenging market that we have going, we've done an incredible job filling these positions. We are in a great position right now. And this levy, and I hear you want those positions filled. I do too. My team does as well. And so we've been working to create efficiencies, to get qualified applicants, to entice other deputies and officers from other agencies to come here because it costs you less and we can put them to service faster. So what you're hearing is that we're saving money. We're not saving money. What we want to do is get this levy to the life cycle that it's intended for and hire up. And then ask the voters, because we can't do without the 100 positions, to continue trusting us with their dollars, that we're being good stewards, and that we keep everyone safe.
And I guess just a point of clarification, and if I'm not meeting your need, then I apologize, but we are not actively holding positions open. That is not what we're doing. So if that's the impression that you're getting, that we're saving money by holding positions open, we're not doing that. We're actively trying to fill every one of those positions.
I understand. Well, back to my previous question about your vacancies. How many exist in the levy versus how many of it exists? Because, I mean, the reality is, and you know, this is your choice about which positions you fill first.
Absolutely. And what I can tell you is that all of the jail deputy positions are filled. There are no jail deputy.
Jail deputy positions funded by the levy?
Yes, they're all filled. There are 3 vacancies that are in the general fund because the county administrator gave us, or allocated 6 positions to us, I believe, 2 years ago. And because he allocated those last, we filled those last. So we're trying to follow the model that we continued at, first, the ones that are approved are the ones that are filled, and the ones that come later, they are filled last, if that makes sense. So the levy positions, I believe we have 6 patrol deputy positions, that vacancies in the levy. I believe that's correct. And I believe we have 4 detective positions, all of which we are actively recruiting. None of which we are trying to hold open.
And it comes back to the, what you're asking is general fund filled positions versus levy positions. And the levy positions are the additional services that you are paying in addition to your regular property taxes for your regular police services. So and the levy money doesn't go away. We're staffing up as fast as we can with the right people. We're filling those positions.
Excellent. Do you anticipate, though, that you'll have enough money in the levy to fulfill all of the needs of the levy? Because it sounds like some costs are rising higher than expected, and this could be a problem.
So we have done projections. I believe it will get there.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah, just one quick clarification. It just could be a difference in beliefs or understanding, and I guess I just want to just build on this. I don't think that when the levy's passed, in the mind of the voter, they're probably saying, geez, I do want, let's say, 10 more patrol deputies than we currently have today. Not what was allocated in the budget, because they don't know that. Let's just say there was, at the time, the day the levy passed, there were 20 vacant positions in patrol, hypothetically. But the citizens who voted that day wanted 10 more than they currently have today, right? So I think, to Mr. Rhodes' point, that the mandate of the voters is what is to be fulfilled in the levy. Fill those first, because that's the most recent mandate. The second mandate is what the voters passed was ELED, right? That's another mandate. That's embedded in there in the sense of a district where it's ongoing, right? Those, we got instructions from the voters. We want these services as defined in the ballot, right? The general fund, so to speak, I'm not saying it's a priority, but it's moving, and there's always vacancies, and sure, it's an addition, but in addition to what? And I think that's the gray area. In addition to what? Added deputies to what? Added deputies to 1990, or added deputies to when the county was formed? Added deputies to today, tomorrow, or whatever as the county grows? I think that's the gray. What is additional? And I would say, frankly, I'd probably have to rely on how many deputies were on the payroll, on the streets, boots on the ground, the day the levy passed.
And I would agree with that. So what the general fund, what the county's obligation to public safety services, which is the general fund support, which is the majority of the public safety services that you give general fund dollars, right, what the community expects. The enhanced law enforcement district picked up the extra, right, the addition over the top of that, and the levy. The levy is very specific in additional positions to be filled, filled and worked as additional, right, patrol the jail, certain programs which are up and running, and we got those fairly quickly. In fact, that question was posed to county council, right? Pose that to county council because there is a differing, which the performance, audit with the county finance and with CCSO with us addresses, hey, so what is the philosophy there? Well, county council agrees with me. And it is how the ballot measure is written, and it is for additional services. But the good news is that this year, I believe we're going to reach that.
Fiscal year or calendar year?
For
Filling those positions?
calendar year.
Calendar year, so by December or January 1.
That is my goal.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, guess what? That was a lot of questions. Under Sheriff Ashby, he dominated this conversation, and we need to fix that. So next year, just tone it down a little. Gary is going to probably kick me. I do have one question, Sheriff Brandenburg, if you wouldn't mind, and I think we've touched on it a little bit. As we know the different funding sources for your office, right? So general fund, ELED, and levy. How do you decide what gets funded by the levy versus like the general fund? How do you make those decisions? I hope that can be an easy, quick answer.
You're talking about the language of what?
Well, how do you make the decision on what gets funded by what?
So the additional services, so the spirit of the levy, which is why we went to county council to ask that question, are additional services. So you pay, I don't believe you're in the ELED, you pay your taxes, you get your police services. And then you said yes on the ballot, on the levy that said, yes, I would like 16 more patrol deputies. Yes, I would like to fund a body-worn camera program. Yes, I want mental health medical jail beds, right? Those are the additional services above and beyond what the county can afford to provide for public safety services. If you had said no, we would not be providing those services. We would be asking the county administrator. We had early talks about a body-worn camera program. They're super expensive. And now we know it's going up. It's even more expensive now. But it's necessary because of the risk. You save money on the other end. With our risk, with our quality investigations. There's a myriad of great things that come with the body-worn camera program. But these are the additional services that you said yes to, that you pay additional taxes to. And so to me, is looking at that, looking at those additional services, people and programs, is separate from what the county provides as general public safety services.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to finish by saying this. For all of you who are here representing the Sheriff's Office, both sworn and non-sworn, I want to say thank you. I want to say thank you for what you do every day. It's not easy. I know that in my former line of work, we got to work together closely, and it's not an easy job. So I know I can speak on behalf of everybody up here and on this committee that we greatly appreciate you, each and every one of you. Thank you. Part of that celebration for what DA Wentworth said earlier, with us being a metro county, but yet being one of the safest counties in the state, is a lot of because of the work that you do every day. And please remember that we know that, we remember it, and we appreciate it. So thank you very much. I know you had a lot of questions to answer today, but we appreciate it.
Thank you for the opportunity. Thanks
Thank
for the
you.
kind words.
You bet. Gary
All
Schmidt,
right, committee
based on
members,
schedule.
by Oregon budget law, you must hear the rest of the county's proposed budget within 5 hours and 45 minutes.
Oh.
That is your hard stop. You
Wow.
cannot delay it or extend it. You're really behind schedule.
Yes.
So you can eliminate your lunch break, you can eliminate your dinner break, you can shorten both, but you have to finish by 6 p.m. tonight. So committee members, what would you like to do?
Yes, Mr. Savas.
Well, I understand the scheduling, I'll call it a dilemma, or the circumstance here, but typically, in my years of budgeting, we've had 1 or 2 days of presentations followed by the hearing, right? The hearing was typically on a Thursday, I believe, I don't know, maybe, no, on a Wednesday on a full week. This is a half a week, or part week. So we had 2 days in advance. We didn't have hearings on the very first day of all the presentations, right? So I say that the scheduling, the legal requirements for posting has put us in this little bit of a dilemma. So I would say that if the presentations the remainder of the day are brief, but there's follow-up, we do the hearing tonight, keep everything on schedule, and do the follow-up questions and answers and give it the time this group wants and needs, as well as the opportunity for all the other departments to present fully. So if that makes sense, it's maybe a little bit in between. Do the minimal today and any overflow tomorrow.
So we are following the same schedule we did last year, Commissioner. Department directors are not presenting what the elected officials did today. It's going to be a hybrid format with Elizabeth and Sandra, with the directors asking questions. That is a good solution, though, Commissioner. If you have to limit your questions or say, here's the question, we'll wait for answers tomorrow. That is another option, too.
Okay, as your chair and being new to this process, I am looking for direction based on your guys' experience on what would be the right way to move forward.
I would advise a 30-minute lunch break. You come back, and if you power through the day, you can have a longer dinner break.
That sounds good to me. I'm assuming everybody else would be in favor of that. Yes, Commissioner Scholl.
Chair Karn, during the CCSO briefing, 35 minutes of that time was spent on questions that was not directly related to the CCSO budget being presented. I recommend that you require the Budget Committee, if they have a general information question, something of personal edification, that they send that to the required personnel for an email answer. Otherwise, we'll never get through the day. Thank you.
I understand that. Everybody else, so I think we all understand that. We want to be specific and to the budget that's being presented, and if there's anything else that's needed, we can do exactly that. Thank you, Commissioner Scholl. Okay.
We are reconvening at 12:45 p.m.
Copy that,
31 minutes.
12:45.